Okay, maayong hapon sa inyo tanan-tanan. How are we doing this afternoon? Not too bad. Let's open up with a word of prayer and we'll get going with a virtual tour of the nation of Israel and Turkey. Salamat liwakino para sa niyapon, Father. We just thank you as always for a time to gather together, Lord, to be able to look at your land. Lord, we know one day, sigurado, tanan-tanan, we're all going to see it, Jesus. You're going to return. You're going to come gloriously set down upon the Mount of Olives, Father, and we will be there with you. Pod kami sa imo, Ginoo. Lord, we look forward to that day. But until then, Lord, it is a blessing to be able to look at the land, to recognize that the Bible that we hold is not just a set of stories. Lord, it is real places with real people. It is history that unfolded in the plan of redemption that you have given to mankind. And Lord, we just pray that it does stir hearts this afternoon. Lord, as we get a chance to see these places, to hear the stories, Lord, that it gets us excited to go deeper into your word, we pray and ask. In Jesus' name we say, Amen. Well, I do not know how long this will take. I'm hoping no more than 5 or 6 hours. So kung gutom ka mo, basi kaon ka mo, anay, maybe 2 hours na lang. I'm thinking it probably will take. But our plan is to take you through what we just went through in Israel and Turkey. We had 15 days going through the Holy Land. We were 10 days in Israel, another 5 days going through the 7 churches of Revelation chapters 2 and 3. As you're going through Ephesus, Smyrna, Thyatira, Pergamos, all the way on through as you're going through what's in modern-day Turkey, biblical Asia Minor. 60 different sites in all. We were hitting an average about 5 a day, which was moving pretty fast. But we wanted to see as many as we could to get a chance to lay that foundation of the Word of God. Now, of course, the way that we begin the tour is you have to arrive. It's, by the way, about 12 hours from Manila just to get to Istanbul. It's another 2 hours from Istanbul to fly into Tel Aviv. So, medyo kalawig. It's a pretty long trip as far as trips go. You're a pretty good way away. You're going about 10,000 kilometers to get over to the Holy Land. And when you arrive, it's kind of amazing, actually. You come to the airport. It's called Ben Gurion International Airport. Ang tsura na lang is puno mga bato. It's all stone. For that is the look of Israel. Israel is all stone. Jerusalem is all stone. It all has the same look, the same appearance. Everything is built that way, including the airport. It's a stone-covered airport. And when you arrive, you have there written for you, welcome to Israel. Kind of an exciting thing to see. Of course, everybody gets all excited when they take their pictures out in cameras. There was a bit of a hiccup. Kay tanan-tanan kami Pinoy, we're all Filipino. So we arrive at immigration. They said, who's your group? Mga 18 kami. Who's your group leader? They all point at me, of course. Sir, who's your tour guide? Ako lang. Come with us. They pulled us aside for about a half an hour. Everybody's kind of nervous that they're going to let us into Israel or not. You don't need a passport, visa. If you are Filipino and you want to go to Israel, it's one of the countries that require no additional visas. Kind of cool. Do you know why? Habang ka nga ang mga Pinoy pwede makakato sa Israel basta wala visa. There's a good reason. In 1948, when the United Nations voted for Israel to become a nation, the tie-breaking vote was the Philippines. They voted in favor of Israel becoming a nation. Ever since that day, Israel has said any Filipino that wants to come, pwede get. So wala visa, wala problema. Wala tour guide? Apparently may problema. They said, sit here please. Mga tunga sa oras, hula kami. Wala pamangko, by the way. They just had to sit. Everybody's kind of nervous or going, kulwaan, basi wala hindi pwede masulod. After about a half hour, they called us all into an office. Medyo seryoso. And ang mga taga-Israel, they're not very polite. Don't get me wrong, they're not an impolite people. But when you're surrounded by nations that want to kill you, when tanan-tanan palibot sa inyo, they want to see you wiped out, you deal with life a little more frankly. You don't deal a lot with pleasantries. It's not a, hey, how are you? Nice to see you. Kumusta? It's not anything like that. It's very straightforward. I tried to be polite with them. How are you doing today, sir? Get out of my office. Wat lang ka? Okay, I'm going to leave the office now. And it wasn't rude, it's just, that's Israel. After about another half an hour, okay na kamo, pwede masulod. Okay, salamat sa Ginoo. We were praying pretty hard, by the way, making sure there was no problem. But in we went. We were able to get in. We got our rental cars. We had 4 rental cars, 5 people to a car. Gamay gid pa. They were itty-bitty little cars. In fact, we told people when you're packing your luggage, for 2 weeks, 15 days, you get 1 carry-on piece of luggage. Basta may sulod sa carry-on. Hindi lang ka dako-dako gid carry-on na lang. That's what you had for all of your clothing, everything you had for 15 days, because everything for 5 people had to go into 1 car. Gamay gid. And so we all crunched in there, slammed in, got all tightly packed in, and we started on our tour. Now, I'm going to show you a couple sites we did not get to. And I'll explain why in a minute. The first site, this is one of the few we did not make it to, was Joppa. That's biblical Yaffo. Joppa is right there close to Ben Gurion International Airport. It's about 20-minute drive. Pero it has no parking. Like wala gid. Basta may bus, pwede. Kung may mga salakyan, budlay hindi pwede. We learned this a couple of years ago when we tried it. It's not much to see, by the way. It's just a beautiful location. There's not much there in the way of archaeology, not much in the way of ruins. So not all that critical if you miss it. We were there in 2019 when we led a trip over. That's when we learned there was no parking. But the site is known for 2 very important things. Number 1, daw naman kamo, ang isa katao, iyan nalan, Jonah. Who remembers the name of Jonah? What's Jonah famous for? Ano natabo sa iya? He got eaten by a fish. A big old fish came and swallowed him up because God called him to go where? Where was he supposed to go? Nineveh. Nineveh, by the way, is modern-day Iraq. That would be to the east of Israel. Jonah got a boat going west, sailing towards Tarshish, which is modern-day Spain. Literally the opposite direction. He was running away from the plan of God, and he set sail from the city of Yaffo, Joppa. So Yaffo was the place where Jonah fled from the Lord. Pero, amoman, do you remember in Acts chapter 10, may isa katao, iyan nalan si Cornelius. He was a Roman centurion. He had a vision of an angel who said, go get Peter. He's in the city of Yaffo, Joppa. He's at the house of Simon the tanner. So this is the city where Peter was doing ministry when he had the vision from heaven. May iskahabol, halin sa langit, nagdagdag, full of mga sapa. This is where that all took place, was in the city of Yaffo. So Jaffa is known for its place where Jonah ran. It's also known for being the place where Peter got the wisdom to share the gospel with the Gentiles. It was derigid, ang unagid, mga Gentile, pwede maluwas sila. This is where God first told Peter that Gentiles and Jews could both be saved. So that's Joppa. From Joppa, we went to a place that I had never been before. Bago gid para sa akon ni. I have been to Israel 7 times now. But in the 7 times, I had never yet had a chance to go here. It's called Nazareth Village. Now, what's famous about Nazareth? Can anyone tell me what happened in Nazareth? Why do you know the name Nazareth? Who grew up in Nazareth? Jesus. What's one of his names? Jesus of Nazareth. He's known as a Nazarene. That's one of his titles. Now, there's a reason why we had never been to this place. Nazareth is not nice. Do you remember Philip, when he was told that Jesus was from Nazareth, Yesabat, what good can come from Nazareth? It wasn't a nice place in the days of Jesus. It was mga pigado lang. It was not a place you would go and visit. Hasta subong. Nazareth has not changed. It's not really a nice place. So for the previous 6 times I had been to Israel, paglabay na lang ko. You went by there as fast as you could. You did not stop in Nazareth. But they recently built a site there called Nazareth Village, where they recreate the village of Jesus from his own time. They have shepherds. They have potteries. They have preachers, all in the outfits of the time of Jesus, reenacting what life would be like in his village 2,000 years ago. It was actually really cool. Now, first of all, when we arrived, medyo gutom kami. Mga alauna, alas dos, nangabot kami. And they have a meal. But the food they feed you is food from 2,000 years ago. It's tinapay, sila maluto lang. They cook it right there for you. They cook these pitas on an open fire. And they have hummus. You know what hummus is? Chickpeas. It's like a garbanzo bean kind of a thing where they mush it up into a fine mash. Super tasty, by the way. Namin get hummus. Super good. And they have some soup, may sabaw, may manok pa. But it's all cooked in a very old style. So you have a Jesus feast. Man, was it good. We loved it. It was incredible food. Basika gutom kami, but it was still amazing. Afterwards, they take you through the village. One of the places they take you is the olive grove. Now, sa Israel, damo mga alibo. There's lots of olive trees. They grow everywhere. And what they'll do is they harvest these olives, but when you pull them off the tree, hindi pwede makaon. You can't eat them. Actually, make you very sick if you do. If you want to eat them, you must soak them in salt water for about 2 weeks before you can consume them. It softens them up. Okon, you crush them to make olive oil, mantika. This is an olive press. It's a 2,000-year-old replica, hindi tuod gid, but it's a replica of what they would have used as an olive press. Do you know what they call it? Mainalan. The word olive press in Greek is the word Gethsemane. Are you familiar with the name Gethsemane? Gethsemane literally means the olive press. So that is a Gethsemane. Now that makes a lot of sense. We're going to look at this in a minute because when Jesus prayed in the garden on the Mount of Olives before his crucifixion, what was the name of the place where he prayed? Gethsemane. Because he was being crushed by the weight of the sin of the world. He, in the place of the olive press, was bearing the weight of the sin of all mankind. Kind of amazing. So that's the Gethsemane right there where they crushed the olives. But they also had this old preacher. He was not Israeli, he was English. Kind of ruined it a little bit, but it's okay. He spoke with an English accent. But he read out of Luke chapter 4. For Jesus, we're told, stood up in the synagogue in Nazareth after the reading of, hey, I come to set the captives free. So it says, liberty those who are in chains, to bring sight to the blind, healing to the captives. And Jesus said, this day, this scripture is fulfilled in your ears. And he sat down because he was claiming to be the Messiah. He read that very scripture in the synagogue they had recreated where Jesus was rejected by his own people. For they said, sino ikaw? Kilala kami imo nanay? Kilala kami imo tatay? You say you are the Messiah? They rejected him and wanted to kill him there in his hometown, which is why Jesus said a prophet is not without honor except in his own country. And that was all here in Nazareth. Amazing as they recreated all that for us in Nazareth village. That's the group, by the way. That's a shepherd, Mantecanero. He was there. I'll give you a little bit of a video of it. So it was an opportunity to see what the village would have looked like in the time of Jesus. Biblical Nazareth. And they played hide and seek even back then. Seed in the sower, nangani, tubig. That's making wool from sheep, sheep wool, gathering olives. Ilapag kaon. That's where we had the dinner. Oh, so good. That was so tasty. Oh my goodness. Amazing food. Amazing, amazing food. So that was Nazareth Village. Now, halin sa Nazareth Village, we went about 45 minutes back towards the ocean. So Nazareth is medyo tunga na lang. It's about the center of Israel. So we went from Tel Aviv, drove about 2 hours up to Nazareth. From Nazareth, mga 45 minutes, we drove back towards the ocean to Mount Carmel. Now, Mount Carmel is famous for one thing. Ano natabot sa Mount Carmel? How well do you know your Bible history? May isa ka propeta, Ian Allen, Elijah went to Mount Carmel to face off against the prophets of Baal. This is where Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 19 faced off against the prophets, and he had the face off for who could call fire down from heaven. Absolutely amazing sight, by the way. So it's very much at the top of one of the mountains that sits right on the coast. So if you look to the west, you have the Mediterranean Ocean. From Mount Carmel, if you look to the east, it's the Valley of Megiddo. Kabalo ka mo anong Valley of Megiddo? May laing nganalan. The Valley of Megiddo is also called Har Megiddo. Har Megiddo is what we would call Armageddon. So from the valley, from the top of Mount Carmel, you can see Armageddon. You can see the Valley of Megiddo, where, we'll talk about this a little bit later, the Antichrist will one day face off against Jesus Christ and the final battle at the end of the Great Tribulation. Beautiful view, incredible place. This is where Elijah challenged the false prophets of King Ahab, 450 kabilag sila, to see who was the true God. Do you remember the story? Elijah said, may dua ka halad. Isa ka baka para sa inyo, isa ka baka para sa aton. And we can cut up the meat, put it on the altar, pero hindi pwede masingga. You can't light the fire. Hindi pwede masiga. You have to allow your God to light the fire. So subilog sa adlaw, ang mga propeta nila sa the false prophets of Baal, they called out, they cried out, pero wala sa baalan sa Ginoo. And Elijah begins to make fun of them. Hindi mo Ginoo. Basi pahaway lang siya. Maybe it's his day off. Basi sa CR na lang siya. Dugay-dugay mabalik siya. I mean, he's making fun of them, giving them the hardest time, and they're getting all the louder. They start to cut themselves, try to see if they can get their God to respond, pero wala sa baalan sa iya. And Elijah says, okay, my turn. Pour water on the altar. Once, twice, 3 times. Asa puno-puno gid. And he said, now so that you know there is only one God, and he called out on the name of Yahweh, the one true living God, show them that you are the only living God. May kalayo halin sa langit, nagdagdag, consume the altar, consume the offering, consume the rocks, consume the water, till nothing was left, and all the people fall down and worshipped and said, the Lord, He is God. There at the top of Mount Carmel. This is where Elijah proved to all of the people of Israel in the time of Ahab that God was the only true living God. Amazing sight, incredible place. Well, from Mount Carmel, we drove, gabi na, to the city of Tiberias. Tiberias is the largest city on the western shores of the Sea of Galilee. Kung sa kabi, hindi pa makita. Now, first of all, know that the Galilee is very low. So when you go into the Galilee, you panaog, you drop down quite a ways. Not because there are mountains around it, but because the valley that holds the Galilee is below sea level. You are 200 meters below the level of the sea level when you get to the Sea of Galilee. So it's very, very, very low. So we're dropping in late at night, driving down the hill. We come to our hotel. Tulog na lang. Kapoy gid. Labang nga biyahe, we're exhausted. But I know something. When you first arrive in a foreign country that is many, many miles away, you have something wonderful called jet lag. Have you ever heard of jet lag? Oh, jet lag is an amazing thing. Jet lag means that basta toyo-toyo gid, mga alas 12 sa aga, mabugtaw ka. You're wide awake and you're going, great, what do I do now? We had a plan. Everybody, when you wake up by jet lag, and everybody does, meet us at 5 a.m., we're going to go down and watch the sunrise over the Sea of Galilee. So the first time we got to see the Galilee, sa aga na lang gid, we just held worship. We got out there with the guitar, tupat sa bye-bye, and we just worshiped as we watched the sun come up over the place where almost all of Jesus' ministry took place. This is where He walked on water. This is where He ministered to the disciples. This is where He preached the message, where He fed the 5,000. Tanan was on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Amomogit Sabang. It's the same place it's always been. Incredible, amazing. It's not very big, by the way. Importante gid ni. When you hear the word sea, ang pinsar na lang, dako gid. The Sea of Galilee is mga 13 kilometers long and about 6 kilometers wide. When you stand on the shore, you can see the entire thing in one glance, which is why it's also known as the Lake of Gennesaret. It's actually not a sea. Kung totoo nga sea, it's salt water. But the Lake of Gennesaret, Sea of Galilee, is fresh water. In fact, it is the source of all fresh water in Israel comes from the Sea of Galilee. Tanan nila mga tanom, tanan nila mga inom comes out of that location. That is the source of all of their water. So it's actually fresh water. It's actually not that big, but it is the Sea of Galilee, which we had the chance to go out on. Now, may kilala ko, he's a real sweet guy. Iyan si Daniel Carmel. Hudeo siya. Pero he's a Christian. He believes in Jesus Christ, believes that Jesus is the Messiah. So Daniel takes you out in his boat. Ang tsura na lang is like an old boat. Bago lang. It's not old, but it's just made to look old, so it's got that feel from biblical times. He takes you out into the middle of the sea. Masimba kami. You worship. In English, Filipino, pwede man, kag Hebrew, which, by the way, was like a highlight for everybody. They thought it was the most amazing thing to be out on the Sea of Galilee. There you are, surrounded by the waters from the time of the Bible, and you're just worshiping the Lord, just singing praises in multiple languages. It's really tremendous and amazing, amazing experience in time. So you get to go out and be on the Sea of Galilee. I'll give you a short little video here, kind of shows you the idea. That's Daniel in the back there. Neat, neat brother. Sweet, sweet brother. Even shows you how they fish. That's biblical fishing. Net. They don't use a line in a reel. It's just throw your net into the water, which is what you read from biblically. So that was the Sea of Galilee. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But from the Sea of Galilee, we went to our first site on the western shores of the sea, which is a city called Magdala. Do you know why you would hear the name Magdala? Where have you heard that name before? May isa ka babae, nakalin sa Magdala. Her name was Mary Magdalene. Yes. This is the home of Mary Magdalene. It's interesting because the city, kamang ciudad, it wasn't very big. It's a fishing village. But you know what they're famous for? May uga sila. That's what they sold. You think in 2,000 years ago, they were famous for dried fish. That's what they made. There was no refrigerators, so that's how they preserved their fish when they caught them in the Sea of Galilee. And Magdala in particular was famous for all of its dried fish. It had a pretty good economy. Now, apparently not a very moral city. For Mary had 7 demons inside of her, if you remember the story. She was severely possessed. There are those who believe, but there are those who believe that the woman in Luke chapter 7, in the house of Simon the Pharisee, nagluhod siya, and she wipes Jesus' feet with her tears. And Jesus says, "Woman, your sins are forgiven." Many believe that was Mary Magdalene, as the Lord saved her, healed her from a very wicked and sinful lifestyle. That there is the city of Magdala. You get to go and see it. I got to be honest. My favorite part of Magdala is their church. Catholico na lang. Don't misunderstand. I don't love the denomination per se. Nothing bad, but just not my favorite per se. But you can't actually go behind this even. But that right there is their pulpit. My favorite pulpit ever. Because you're standing in a boat. Sa likod sa imo is the Sea of Galilee with a glass window. So you get to preach from a boat on the Sea of Galilee. Favorite pulpit I've ever seen. Hands down, that's the best pulpit in the whole world. Amazing. I love that in Magdala. They have the best pulpit ever. But that is the city of Magdala, which is just a little bit north of the city of Tiberias on the western shores of the Sea of Galilee. Now, from Magdala, we went about 5 minutes, lapit na lang, to the north to the city of Capernaum. Have you ever heard of Capernaum? How ka mo mahinalan Capernaum? This was the home base, if we will, the main city that Jesus ministered in. The name is interesting. It's actually the word Kaver Nechom. Kaver means the village of Nahum. So this is where Nahum came from. It's the village of the prophet Nahum. Kaver Nechom. In case you didn't know, that was the background behind it. It's got a beautiful synagogue. Maybe. There is some problems. That's what you see sa likod dara, my columns, my hiligi. That is the synagogue at Capernaum. But there's some problems with it. Synagogues always face Jerusalem. Wherever they are, baskin diyan sila sa kalibutan, the synagogue will point towards Jerusalem because, according to 1 Kings chapter 7, if God's people who are called by His name cry out and pray to the Lord, pray to the city of God, God will hear them and heal their land, right? All synagogues face Jerusalem. This one does not. And so there's some question, is it really a synagogue? More likely what you're looking at is a church built several hundred years later on top of the ruins of the synagogue underneath where Jesus healed the lame man's hand. So ang lugar tuotogid. Pero the building is a more modern structure built to remember what had taken place there in biblical times. So the synagogue location is correct. That is actually where Jesus was, where Jesus healed, where Jesus did ministry. But the building is a bit more modern by a couple hundred years. By the way, when you are in Israel, basta may pamangko, daan gid ni. Ang sabat is usually, hindi na lang. 2,000 katuig na lang. It's only 2,000 years, and you're going, 2,000 years? That's not old? In Israel, no. 2,000 years? Bago pa na. Kayong iban? 4,000. Things in Israel are very old. So you look at a synagogue and you go, is that old? No, it's not that old. It's only about 1,700 years, so that's kind of new. That's just Israel. Things in Israel are different. They work on a different scale. It is a city, it is a nation that has incredible history. But there's some pretty cool places right near there as well. So when you get to Capernaum, you have a millstone. Now, basta may olive. The only way to get an olive to produce oil is you have to roll a millstone over it. Bugat gid, by the way. Sobra probably 200-300 kilos. And they have one actually from Jesus' time sitting right there in Capernaum. It's heavy, not because of its weight, because of what Jesus said. Luke chapter 17, verses 1 and 2. It's impossible that someone will not stumble, my little children, but woe unto the one who does. It would be better if he ties a millstone around his neck. Grabe, dako, gibuga gid. Naglumpat sila. Lapit naman into the bye-bye, right into the ocean, to the Sea of Galilee. And you can see that picture. You understand just what Jesus was talking about. Do not harm His kids. But there is one other really cool place there. This is the aerial view of Capernaum. You can see the synagogue there sa ubos na lang. That's the white structure at the bottom. There's a octagonal building sa tungap. Kita mo? It's a church. It's a Catholic church. Again, that's very common, by the way. Many of the churches there are Catholic churches. They've been built over the years. But underneath that church, ang sulog na lang is crystal, is the house of Peter's mother-in-law, which is kind of interesting. It's interesting because they have uncovered Peter's mother-in-law's house, but it's also interesting because Peter had a mother-in-law. Now, hula lang anay. Hindi alam gid ko. Pero basta may mother-in-law, what does that mean about you? You must have a wife who has a mother. You can't have a mother-in-law without a wife. That just doesn't work. Meaning that Peter had a asawa. It's not the only place in the Bible where we read that. Paul also would say that Peter, he calls him Cephas, another one of his names, brought his wife with him to do ministry. So really, wala pamangko. Peter did absolutely have a wife, which is contrary to certain denominations. Do with that as you will, but needless to say, that's the house of his mother-in-law underneath the massive Catholic church there in Capernaum. Well, from Capernaum, we drove up a hill. Sa bukid na lang. It's right there above the city. So, ara sa Capernaum, tupat sa baybay. Kung pasa ka sa bukid, mga maybe 200-300 meters na lang, you come to the place called the Mount of Beatitudes. Who knows what the Beatitudes are? Sa diyan sa Biblia. Where are they in the Bible? Matthew chapter. It's actually the longest sermon of Jesus in all of the New Testament. The Sermon on the Mount, chapters 5, 6, and 7 of the book of Matthew, is the longest teaching recorded in the Bible, and it was recorded here on the Mount of Beatitudes. And when you get there, it makes sense why Jesus said what he said. Kay, in the time of Jesus, wala simbahan, there was no buildings. It was just a field in Hilamon. It was just a lapag na lugar where the people could come and listen to Jesus as he taught them. And palibot sa imo, all around you are beautiful flowers. Gorgeous, gorgeous flowers. And the idea is simply this. When you're looking at the flowers, you understand why Jesus would say, look at the flowers of the field. Even Solomon in all of his splendor was not arrayed, was not clothed as much as they are, yet they're here today, mahaboy, they're just thrown into the fire tomorrow. So why do you worry about what you will wear? Why do you worry about what you will eat? Amo man, if you stop, pamati na lang, may damo mga pispis. You can hear them, you can see them flying all around the trees. Asa subang, ara pa sila. And Jesus said, look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap. They don't have a storehouse, yet your Father in heaven takes care of them. Why do you fear? Instead, seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness. And all of these things, the Lord will add them to us. And when you're in that place, you're going, I get why Jesus said it. He was using the surroundings all around him to teach spiritual truths to the people about what it meant to be children of the kingdom. That was the Mount of Beatitudes, absolutely gorgeous location looking down upon the Sea of Galilee. Well, from there we went to a place called Bet Guvrim. Now, let me teach you a little Hebrew. In Hebrew, basta may nalan, Bet. Bet means balay. So Bet Guvrim is the house of Guvrim. You might ask, who's Guvrim? I don't know. It's some guy that lived in a kibbutz there and they named it after him. But it means the house of Guvrim. When you read the word Bethlehem, Bet means house, Lachem means bread. It's the house of bread. Bethel, Bet, house, El, Dios, God. It's the house of God. So whenever you see the word Bet, it just means balay na lang. So this is Bet Guvrim. It is a kibbutz. Not kibbut, kibbutz. Kibbutz in Hebrew means like a social enclave, like a, how do you say this? Like a commune. So sa nagligid, subang jutay lang, but sa nagligid sa Israel, the people would come together in almost like a communist compound where tanan-tanan sila maobra pero wala sweldo. Tanan sila may pagkaon, may balay, may tulogan, pero wala sweldo. They would just work and they would live together. They were called kibbutz. And Bet Guvrim was a kibbutz in Israel on the Sea of Galilee. They would grow, by the way, grabe ilang mga tanom. May saging sila. Sa Israel, you don't think of saging from Israel. Damo, we're talking pila ka hectares, hindi pwede maisip. There were just fields upon fields of saging. Manga pa. Pomegranates. Grapes. Dates. Like you would not believe. They grow everything. It's an amazing, amazing place. The land has blossomed like you would not even imagine. But at Bet Guvrim, they grow saging, kag manga. But one day, the Sea of Galilee was very low in its level. Kay basta jutay ulan, nagnubo ang tubig sa Sea of Galilee. It drops down. It can drop 10, 15 meters, depending on the year. Nubo gid, and it uncovered a boat that no one knew was there before. Sa lungang na lang, it was just there in the mud. It turns out it is 2,000 years old. It is a boat from the time of Jesus. Now, this is not Jesus' boat. It's an important distinction. There's no way to prove that. Pero it is a kind of boat that Jesus would have been in, which makes it really important because if you're wondering, pinakatakbo ang mga barko in the time of Jesus, how big were their boats? Well, they weren't very big at all. They're actually very small. Can you imagine, to si kalalaki, kag si Jesus pa, sa loob sa isa ka barko that's maybe 3 meters, 4 meters long and 1 meter wide? And you understand why they would be afraid if there was a storm that they were all going to die. Kay gamay-gamay gid ila barko. It's very, very small. And so when you see that, it really gives you that perspective of what it means when it says they couldn't pull in the fish when they had sobra 300. Throw your net on the other side. Damo-damo isda. When they tried to pull it in the boat was almost ready to sink. Kay gamay gid. They're not very big boats. And when you see them, it gives you that picture and understanding of just how tiny they are. This is how they preserved the boat itself. Quite incredible, by the way. And they're rebuilding it so you can kind of see what it would have looked like. That's the boat in all of its glory. So they do call it the Jesus boat because it's from the time of Jesus, but it is not actually Jesus' boat. Great for perspective, though. Gives you the size of the boat. Lets you see how big they would have been back in Jesus' day. So from Bet Guvrim, from what they call the ancient boat, we come around to the eastern side of the Galilee. So all of that, Magdala, Capernaum, Mount of Beatitudes, Bet Guvrim, are all on the western shore. But we swing around to the eastern side and we come to a place called Kursi. Now the building you're looking at is a church, Simbahan na lang ina. It's from the Byzantine era. Wala lang anay. Kaya importante gid ni basi ni nakadyan ka mong nalan ni. Who's ever heard of the Byzantines? Raise your hand if you've heard of Byzantines. Isa, dua, ang ibang wala. Ang nalan Byzantine, wala ka mo, ang ibang wala ka mo? You've never heard that name? It's important that I explain this because you're going to hear this more than once. When Rome converted to Christianity under Constantine. Who's ever heard of Constantine? Ang iban, kabla ka mong nalang Constantine. Constantine was the Roman emperor, mga 300 AD, who had a vision and said, sa bilog sa Rome, the entire empire needs to become Christian. When he did so, he wanted to change location. He said, I don't want Rome to be my capital anymore. Rome is a pagan place. Tamo mga temples, tamo mga Dios, mga revolto. Let's leave Rome. I want to create a new city. So he created his own city called Constantinople. Constantinople has a bagong nalan subong. Kabalo ka mong nalan subong sa Constantinople? It's called Istanbul. Istanbul is biblical. It is the Christian heart of Constantinople. From 300 AD all the way through 1200 AD for 1,000 years. So isa ka libo katuig, Constantinople was the heart of Christianity. Not Rome, not Europe, it was Constantinople. Eventually it fell to the Ottoman Turks and was converted over to Islam. Different story, we'll get there in a minute. But know that the Byzantine Empire, which was the empire out of Constantinople, ruled the Christian world for 1,000 years. So they built lots of churches. This is a Byzantine era church from about 300-400 AD. Built on the site of the Gadarenes. Ari ang story. Paborito ko niya. I love this story, by the way. Jesus told his disciples, Tabok na kita. Let's sail over to the other side, to the Decapolis. The name Decapolis is Deca, pulo, polis, ciudad, pulo ka ciudad. He wanted to sail over to the 10 cities on the eastern shores of the Galilee. Now, the eastern shores are interesting. For the eastern shores belong to 3 tribes. The tribe of Gad, Reuben, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. If you remember from the book of Joshua, when the Israelites first came into the promised land, 9.5 tribes, nagsulod sila. 2.5 tribes, Nagbilan sila sa sagwa on the eastern side of the Jordan River. Gad, Reuben, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Because they did not come into the land, they were the first ones to be conquered. Pamati naman. Kay lapit sila sa Ginoo, but hindi sulod. They were the first to be compromised and stumbled. So by the time Jesus comes in, the early first century, they were now a godless people. How godless were they? What did they raise? Ano ilang mga sapa? Ano klase? What kind of animals did they have? Baboy. Were Jews allowed to have pigs? No. Baboy are a forbidden animal for Jews to eat. That's probably worth mentioning real quick. Are you aware, kabalo ka mo may lai sila sa mga Hudeo? Hindi pwede mabawas sila para makaon baboy. Are you familiar with that? Jews can't eat pigs. They can't have pigs. Hindi pwede makaon pasayan. Talaba. There's lots of things they're not allowed to eat. Which does bring up a question, why? Naaka mo, do you know? Why would God say, hindi pwede makaon baboy? Kaya namin sabor, come on. Lechon, bacon? Who doesn't? Everybody loves bacon. Why would you not be allowed to eat bacon? There's 3 reasons, 3 thoughts. 1, ang iba hambal nila, kaya hindi maya para sa itong lawas. They're saying these foods are not really good for us. Kaya damot tambok sa baboy, ang mga sa pasayan damot hikok sa ila, and they go, it's not healthy for you. Yeah, I'm not sure that's the reason. I mean, if God didn't want us to eat things that were unhealthy, He would also, say you couldn't have, Chowking or, Jollibee. I mean, there's lots of things that God would forbid if that was the point. I don't think it's because it was bad for us. So, basta hindi pa kailaing para sa aton. The second reason why people say why Jews could not eat baboy, is to make them different. Sa mga tao palibot sa ila, pwede sila kaong baboy. So, kung mga Hudeo, hindi pwede. The natural question would be, why can't you eat baboy? Which would allow the Jews to talk about the God of Israel. It allowed for the opportunity to tell them about the one true living God. Ang ibang hamal nila is because it made them different. Para balaan sila, make them unique amongst the nations. Pero may katalo pa. The third reason why maybe God said you cannot eat baboy is because it's really tasty. Kaya namin good, and God was testing them to see if they would be obedient. You put a lechon in front of you and say, hindi pwede makaon. It takes self-will. You're like, okay, God, this is a sacrifice. I really want that lechon, but para sa imo, hindi na lang. So basin lang. And then you ask, which one is correct? Wala pa sigurado. But those are the 3 reasons why are put forward that Jews couldn't eat baboy. But needless to say, bawal para sa ila. Yet, the Jews in the Decapolis, that's all they had. Puno sila mga baboy. Which is not surprising then that as godless as they were, as compromised as they were, may isa katao, ianalan, Legion, lived there in the graveyards. How many demons were inside of Legion? Well, the Legion is 6,000 troops. So the presumption is this man had 6,000 demons inside of him. So it's no surprise, buang gid siya. He was crazy. Nakabot si Jesus, nagluhod si Legion. He said, why are you here, Jesus, if you come to torment us before our time? And Jesus just simply said, get out. You're done. Leave them. And they said, well, at least let us go into the pigs. Masulot sa mga baboy na lang. And Jesus said, go ahead, do it, get. And they got out of the man, went into the pigs, ang mga baboy, naglumpat sila sa baybay, and tanan sila mapatay. They all died. And when the word of this, because the shepherds who were watching them went and told the people in the village, in the Decapolis, they came out and you'd think they would be amazed. Like, wow. Kilala sila si Legion. They all knew him. And there he was when they arrived, sane, clothed, in his right mind. And they should have been happy. Kalipay git sila, wow, look at this man. He's been healed. Akik sila ka Jesus. They were so compromised, so far gone, they begged Jesus to leave them. They did not want him around. So Jesus, pwede mahalin ko, but he told Legion, this man who'd been healed, ikaw bilindiri. and tell everybody what I've done for you. And Jesus, dugay-dugay, he came back, and because of the testimony of this man, when Jesus returned, maluwas sila tanan, many became Christians. Because of the testimony of how God had set free a man in bondage to 6,000 demons. Incredible place. And there's actually a cliff right by here. You can see where naglumpat sa mga baboy. There in the Gadarenes, there in the Decapolis, what's called Cursi. Incredible place. Give you a bit of an aerial view. That's what you're looking at. The Sea of Galilee sa likod na lang. So you're in the Sea of Galilee is behind you, and you're looking forward to, that's again a Byzantine church built on the site to remember what had taken place there. Which brings us to the southern end of the Sea of Galilee, to a place called Yardenit. Now, the Sea of Galilee has 3 rivers that feed it with water. You have the Hatspani, the Banyas, and the Dan River. So sapat that flow into the Sea of Galilee. 1 river flows from the Sea of Galilee. What's the 1 river? Ano na lang sa sapat? Alin sa Sea of Galilee? I'm sure you know it. I guarantee you know it. It's called the Jordan River. This is the Jordan River. And now the first thing that you should notice, medyo gamay. It's not very big. From side to side, 4 meters. And the depth of it is maybe 2 meters at the deepest. So when you think of a river, you think of like the Nile or, the Euphrates. It's more like a stream. It's not very big, but this is the biblical Jordan River where Jesus baptized the disciples. Which is why when you get there, everybody gets baptized. You just can't say no to it. I mean, what an opportunity. It's amazing to have that blessing of being baptized in the Jordan River where Jesus baptized his disciples. Absolute highlight, by the way. I mean, just a sweet, sweet time of just praying over the people and just enjoying being just in the water with them. Now, may isa ka problema. Kung nara ka sa Jordan River, may mga isda. Medyo katakot, actually. Some of them are good size. Now, may daw, there's a little bit of a fence to keep the big ones from coming in, but ang mga isda, pwede masulod pa. And they nibble on your feet. They like to chew your toes. Hindi sakit, but it tickles. So you're sitting there and you're praying over someone. I mean, you're just looking for the Spirit to minister and speak through you. And they start giggling. And this is a serious moment. I know, but the fish are tickling my feet. It's kind of sad, but it makes it kind of funny and sweet. But an amazing place, incredible highlight of the trip, of course, is to be baptized in the Jordan River. That was day 2 out of 15. So we'll get there. Don't you worry about it. We'll get there, I promise. Day 3. Bugtaw kita sa aga. We woke up in the morning, still in the Sea of Galilee, but we head north, up what's called the Hula Valley. Medyo alaba, it actually extends from the Sea of Galilee all the way up to Lebanon. It's about 40 or 50 kilometers long. And when you get to the very northern end of the Hula Valley, you come to a place called Tel Dan. Now, basta may nalan Tel. Importante gidni. Tel means an archaeological site. It's a bukid. Basta may Tel, there's a bukid. But it's not a natural bukid, it's man-made. Kaya kung may syudad, it gets conquered, burnt to the ground, destroyed, matindag sila liwat, medyo mas taas. Magubat liwat gets conquered again, rebuilt, taas pagid. Dugay-dugay, it gets to be 100 meters high. All man-made. It's a city that's been built, destroyed, built, destroyed, built, destroyed. Ang nalang palina is a Tel. This is Tel, the ruins of the city of Dan. By the way, gorgeous. Palibot sa inyo, it's all desert. Dry, barren. But you get to Dan, grabe ang tunom sila. Green, gid, damot, too big. You can see why the tribe of Dan came to this ruins. It used to be called the city of Luz, and settled here back in the days of the judges, the time of the judges. So this is the biblical location of the tribe of the city of Dan. Now, once you get through the beautiful lush forest that's there, there is a beautiful ruin of the city itself. You can see the mga bato sa likod. I'm at a distance. You can't see me in the very background. Medyo kalayo gid, lapad. But all of those rocks are the pader and the houses, mga balay, that were inside of the city walls, including the gate of the city. Now, I do laugh at this. Tanang mga lalaki pungkot sila dara. Because this is the gate of the city. If you remember from the book of Ruth, ang mga officials, ang mga hukom, the judges, they would always sit, the most important place was tupad sa gate of the city. Kahit na mga tao, paglabay dara, they all pass by. So this was the place where they would come and present themselves, judge, greet all of the people of the city. And as a subong, Araman, the city of Dan has this gate with may mga bangko dara. There's these seats where the officials would have sat greeting people, the important people who were coming in and out of the city. Including, they found a stone there, may kabato, and you can see this actually in the Israeli Museum. It's no longer at Dan, they've removed it. That is the only archaeological evidence that names Hari David. Actually, for many, many years, hundreds of years, there were those who argued King David was just a biblical figure, not a historical one. They thought he was mythology, hindi tuod. Because they said, we've never found any archaeological evidence ever naming him. Until, there is a Dan, at the gate, may sakabato, written on the stone in ancient Hebrew, pwede mabasa pa, you can still read it. This was from the time when Hari David ruled over Judah. So they actually found the archaeological evidence amazing, just as the Bible said, exactly as it is. David was a true king who ruled over Israel. Now sa likod na lang, at the back of the city, is a temple. Now, they put up some metal there just to kind of recreate it. The metal is not original, obviously. Ang mga bato palibot, that's tuod gid. The metal in the center is just a recreation. It is a recreation of the golden calf. If you remember the story, si Solomon, ikatatlo kang hari sa Israel, the third king of Israel, you had Saul, David, ikatatlo, Solomon. When Solomon died, God allowed, because of the sin of Solomon, for the nation to split into two kingdoms. The 10 northern tribes went with a man named Jeroboam. Jeroboam was the servant of Solomon, and the kingdoms were given to him, the 10 northern tribes. The southern 2 tribes of Benjamin and Judah became the southern kingdom underneath Rehoboam, bata ni Solomon. Duwa ka kingdom now. It's split, it divided. Jeroboam was nervous. He said, base sa mga tao sa Israel, mabalik sila sa Jerusalem para masimba sa Ginoo. And when they go back, they'll want to go back to King Rehoboam. And so he had this idea, I'll create 2 golden calves. One I'll place in Bethel, which is in the south, lapit sa Jerusalem. Ang iban he placed in the city of Dan. This is the actual location where the golden calf would have been that ultimately led to the destruction of the northern kingdom of Israel. Heavy place because this was the sin that destroyed the kingdom. To the very end, God said, you sinned with the sin of Jeroboam. The sin of the golden calf is what destroyed the people. And this is where the golden calf would have been. But lapit na lang, around the corner from the golden calf, is a gate. It's called the Gate of Abraham. Here's why. If you look at the gate, pwede makita sa tunga na lang, subong it's sulod na lang, it's closed up now, but there's a little bit of an archway, darker colored in the sa tunga na lang. That would have been the gate to the city of Dan 4,000 years ago. Isip na lang. Jesus lived 2,000 years ago. This is 2,000 years before Jesus is when that gate would have been built. Daan Gate. It's one of the oldest archaeological ruins anywhere in the world. They call it the Gate of Abraham because according to Genesis chapter 14, when Lot, Nablus ni Abraham, was kidnapped by the king of Babylon, Abraham chased him with the servants in his house, some 318 of them, all the way to the city of Dan, where he managed to rescue his nephew Lot. And the thought is, this is so old This could have been the gate that Abraham walked through. Talk about seriously old archaeological biblical history. You're looking at a gate from the time of Genesis chapter 14 that existed when Abraham was alive. So kind of neat, amazing, old gate that there is in the city of Dan. Now from the city of Dan, lapit naman, mga 10 minutes, you drive to the ruins called Caesarea Philippi. Now, I do love this. For in Caesarea Philippi, Jesus went there in Matthew chapter 16. Mga problema, mga Hudeo, nakakisiya, he was causing a lot of problems there around the Galilee and Capernaum. People weren't that happy with him. So he let things cool it down a bit and went to the north, up to the city of Caesarea Philippi, and he had a question. Iapamang ko para sa mga tao, sino ako? Who do men say that I am? Ang iba ang humble nila? Well, some say you're Elijah. Some say you're John the Baptist. Some say you're the promised prophet of Deuteronomy chapter 18. Okay. Pero pamang si Jesus, who do you say that I am? Nga iba sa mga tao, hindi importante no humble nila. Come on na lang. Who do you say? Peter stands up. You are the Christ, the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God. And Jesus goes, blessed are you, Simon Peter, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father that is in heaven. And I tell you that upon this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. You've heard that before? You know that verse? Let me tell you what it means. For when you are in Caesarea Philippi, it takes on a whole different interpretation. Kai, if you look at Caesarea Philippi, there is a temple. It is the temple of the god Pan. The god Pan is the god of the underworld. Pamakot naman. Ano ang tsura ni Satan? What's Satan look like? If Satan walked into this room right now, other than some serious praying, what would you think he'd look like? Ano yung tsura? Guapo. What does the world think he looks like? You're correct. For we're told in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, he's an angel of light. What does the world say he looks like? Ano color iya panet? Pula? Ano sa ulo? Ano sa likod? Ikog. Ano sa kamo? Pitchfork. Do you know what that's actually from? It's not Satan. It's the Greek god Pan. That's where this comes from. This is the description of mythology for the god of the underworld that is Pan. This is the temple that Jesus is at. And get the idea. Jesus says, you know who men say this guy is. This is Pan, the god of the underworld. Who do men say that I am? Peter comes out with, you are the Christ. He goes, blessed are you, Peter. Now, wala lang anay. Do you know what the name Peter is in Greek? It's the word Pietros. Pietros means gamay nga bato. It means a pebble. You are Pietros, a little pebble. But upon this, Pietra, rock. Different word, by the way. Now, sa likod, so the temple of Pan here is a massive rock face. So we're not talking about the church being built on Peter. Peter is a Pietros. Gamay nga bato. What's the Pietra that Jesus is going to build his church on? And by the way, this is the first time in the Bible the word church is ever mentioned. Matthew chapter 16, the word ecclesia, simbahan, is first mentioned in this chapter. What is the foundation of the church? Not Peter. The statement that Peter makes. You are the Christ. You are the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God. Upon that statement is the foundation of the church of Jesus Christ. Now, here's the thing. I say to you, you are Peter, Pietros, and upon this rock, your statement, Pietra, I will build my church, and the gates of hell. Now, tupad sa temple dere, may kuweba. You see the big cave there? Subang wala na. But sa Langigad, the Banyas River used to flow out of it. Pinsar sa mga tao, it was the gate of hell. Ang nalan para sa kuweba dara is the gates of hell. Jesus is looking at the geography, referencing what they're seeing, talking about the temple, saying the false religions of this world, the false theologies of this life will never be able to come against the statement that I am the one true living Messiah. I am the only way to heaven. And when you're in the sight, you go, grabe, klaro, giri na. You can see what Jesus was saying. He was making this statement, I am the Messiah. I am the foundation, the only way to be saved. There at Caesarea Philippi, at the Temple of Pan, next to the gate of hell. Incredible location. Brings the whole thing to life in a way like you've never seen it before. I love Caesarea Philippi. Very dynamic. Pero halin sa Caesarea Philippi, pasaka, you go up the mountain a bit, and you come to a place called Nimrod's Fortress. Now, let me clarify. This has nothing to do with Genesis chapter 11. This is not the Nimrod of the Bible. This is a Crusader-era fortress, so about 1,000 years old. Remember, basta sa kalibo na lang, bago gid pa ina. So it's a new fortress. Rather relatively recent, it's only 1,000 years old. And it was a Muslim fortress. So the Muslims is massive, by the way. It's a huge, huge fortress. Overlooks the whole valley so that they could protect it against crusaders who were coming in. It was a strategic location. It makes a lot of sense historically. But why we like it is because from Nimrod's fortress, you can look down the mountain and you see Caesarea Philippi. But you can also look up to the top of Mount Hermon and see the highest place in all of Israel, 3,000 meters high. So you can see the entire landscape from Caesarea Philippi all the way to the top of the Bukid, which is important because according to Matthew chapter 16, 6 days after Jesus told Peter, upon this rock I will build my church, he climbed to a high mountain. Ano taas nga bukid? Lapit sa Caesarea Philippi. Mount Hermon. It's the tallest mountain anywhere in Israel. What did Jesus do on top of Mount Hermon? Well, according to Matthew chapter 17, he was transformed. Metamorpho. He took upon himself the true form that he actually has. He revealed himself in all of his glory before Peter, James, and John. Apod sa iya, may dua ka tao. Sino apod sa iya? Do you remember what two men appeared? Elijah and Moses. The law and the prophets, testifying to the fact that Jesus was the fulfillment of the prophecies concerning the Christ. He was the promised Messiah. And it was told to him, revealed to him there, all that would take place regarding his crucifixion and resurrection. The disciples also heard it. Of course, they didn't believe it. But that was all on top of the Mount of Transfiguration there at Mount Hermon. We didn't go up there, by the way. Kahit taas gituod. Grabe kahit taas. It actually sits on 3 countries. Mount Hermon today, 1/3 of it is Israel. 1/3 of it is Syria. 1/3 of it is Lebanon. It actually bridges 3 countries. And it actually snow-covered half the year. Unfortunately, not the time when we were there, because everybody, tanan-tanan na po sa amon, like, may snow sila, kahit tanan gusto sila makakita ng snow. They wanted to see what snow was like. Wrong time of year for snow. But it is snow-covered half the year because it is very tall, very cold, and quite beautiful. They do skiing on top of it. So that was the Mount of Transfiguration, Mount Hermon, and you can see this is all the Fortress of Nimrod, just a beautiful archaeological site. And this gives you an idea of the view. That's the look from Nimrod's fortress over the valley. Really quite impressive. Well, we finished towards the end of the day. We left Mount Hermon, drove a little further to the east to a place called Mount Bental. Mount Bental is not a biblical site. It is a modern site. Do you see the background sa likod dira? See the windmills? May mga gamay nga bukid sa likod? That's all Syria. You're no longer looking at Israel, you're looking into the nation of Syria. In fact, again, on a clear day, you can see the city of Damascus. So you are now on the border of Syria. You're what's known as the Golan Heights. And this place is important because it was a military outpost for many, many years. For Israel has fought 7 major wars since they became a nation in 1948. Now, stop and think about that for a minute. When did the Philippines become an independent country? 1948. When did Israel become a country? Modern. 1948. They have almost identical beginnings. But think about since the time that the Philippines gained its independence, having had to fight 7 major wars where every nation around you wanted you wiped off the face of the planet. This is Israel. Everybody hates them. Everybody is against them. Everybody would love to see them go away. Yet they have miraculously survived. And that's what we look at and talk about when we're on Mount Bental, is these modern wars, because there's some incredible stories. I'll give you 2 of them. One of my favorite stories is there was a Jeep driver. And he was driving by himself. Wala po siya, siya lang gid. And there was an entire battalion of Syrian tanks coming at him. Isa ka Jeep, kontra sa damo mga tangke. Sino madaog? The tanks, of course. What's one Jeep going to do? A lot of tanks, you're not going to stand a chance. But the Jeep driver had an idea. May bukid sa tunga. So, ari ang Jeep driver, may bukid, taas pa, medyo lang. Sa piyak, damo mga tangke. He said, let me do this. Libot-libot lang. He started just driving around as fast as he could in the dirt. And what it did is it kicked up a big cloud of dust. Now the tanks, sa piyak, couldn't see what was happening. They just saw a big cloud of dust. Ang pinsar nila, wow, pasida mo mga Hudeo sa piyak. There must be an entire group of tanks coming at us. We better go and leave. Nagpuli sila. They ran away from one Jeep driver who was libo-libo lang sa in the dust. This is how Israel won its wars. I mean, it's just, you can't justify it. You can't explain it. It was just God giving them grace and victory. Ang ibang paborito man ko ni. There was a spy. Now, Israel has lots of spies. They have organizations. They have one called the Shin Bet. Shin Bet is how they spy in other countries. So let's Israel, may isa pa grupo na nala nila, Mossad. And the Mossad watches everybody in the country. So Jews have lots of spies. They have to watch everybody because everybody wants to kill them. But they had a spy in Syria. And he rose up very high in the ranks in the Syrian army. And one day, they took him to the Golan Heights. Now, here's your geography. We mentioned the Sea of Galilee, Nubot Gid. It's very low down, 200 meters below sea level. As it rises out of the Sea of Galilee, you come up to what's called the Golan Heights. Medyo kataas. That was controlled by Syria. They had the high ground. And they would launch mortars down into Israel, and they would have snipers and shoot at the farmers. There's sabat-sabat gid sa mga taga-Syria. But these fortifications were very well manned on the top. And they were well hidden. Nago lang sila. So this Israeli spy goes to kind of investigate, to review the different defenses on the Golan Heights. And he goes on from site to site, and he goes, Mayo gidni. We're doing very good. The Jews would never be able to conquer this. We are very well fortified. Pero, kalaoy sa mga tao di. Our soldiers, they have no shade. Wala handom sila. I mean, when they're out there, they're defending our great country. They're helping us out. But they're so exposed to the sun. Maybe we should plant some trees just to give them some shade. Doesn't that sound like a good idea? And so the Syrian army said, that's a good idea. We'll plant trees around all of our troops to give them shade as they're up here guarding our fortifications on the Golan Heights. The spy radioed back to Israel. When you attack, aim for the trees. They basically painted a bullseye on every single fortification they had on the Golan Heights, so the Jews knew right what to look for. This is how Israel wins wars. 7 different times, miraculously, God preserved them, kept them, and gave them victory. It's an incredible testimony of God's divine protection. That we talk about more there on Mount Bental. As we're coming home, we return back to the Sea of Galilee. We do stop by briefly a place called Bethsaida. Do you remember Bethsaida from the New Testament? May duwa ka syudad. They're always mentioned together. Woe unto you, Chorazim. Woe unto you, Bethsaida. For Jesus said, if the works that have been done in you, kay damo milagro, damo miracles, have been done in the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, naginoso sila. Pero kamo wala. It'll be better, therefore, in the day of judgment for Sodom and Gomorrah than for you. Interesting, when you go to Bethsaida, beautiful sunsets, real pretty, but nothing is left. It's absolutely decimated Asa Subang. When we do not listen to the words that Jesus gives, the result is destruction and devastation. And Bethsaida is a powerful picture of that. It's a little village that was destroyed because they did not listen to what God said. So, kind of neat, powerful picture there at Bethsaida. Which brings us to day 4. Moving along. If you need to use the bathroom, by the way, feel free to go ahead. Don't worry about getting a drink if you need a drink. But I'll keep going. Not stopping yet. If you get tired of me, let me know and I can stop, but otherwise we'll keep going. From the Galilee, we head south. We're now heading towards Jerusalem. As you go down the Jordan River Valley, you come to one of the more amazing ruins in Israel. It is a city known as Bet Shan. Bet means what? Balai. So it's a balai of a guy named Shan. Now at Bet Shan, one of the more impressive things they have is a beautiful theater. Probably seats about 5,000 people. Now, ang namigid if you stand on the stage, and may mga tao sa babaw gid sa theater, they're sobra 100 meters away from you. Kun utik na lang. Klaro gid. You whisper 100 meters away, you hear them as if they were next to you. This is how theaters work. They were designed to have perfect acoustics. You did not need speakers, you did not need microphones. If you ever wondered how did they have events back in those days, it was the theater's design that allowed for perfect acoustics. It's impressive when you stand there, see the people on the stage, you'd hear them as clear as if they were standing next to you. It's quite neat to do. They also have there this. This is my favorite things at Bet Shan. Any guesses as to what that is? Feel free, guess. I'm curious what you think. If you were to guess what that was, what would you think that was? It is a CR. Now, let me paint the picture because this is revealing. May dakong kwarto, probably about twice the size of this room. Palibot na lang, may mga bato. So you have a bato here and a bato here with a space in between. So you don't sit on the stone, you sit sa tunga. And there's water flowing underneath you. Everybody has long robes. That's the Roman outfit. May labang abayo. And it's co-ed, by the way. Lalaki babae makes no difference. Everybody sits down and you take care of whatever you need to take care of there in the public CR. Sa tunga, they would have music playing for you. Just to make your movement that more peaceful. Truly was a comfort room. CR tuod. It's kind of funny to see. This is a public restroom 2,000 years ago, flowing water. Quite amazing. But it shows you how impressive this city was. This is Bet Shan. So you can see, sa likod, there's the theater, mga 5,000 mga tao. Kita mo ang igdalan sa tunga? That road is called the Cardo. The heart. Cardiology, the heart of the city. Tanang mga baligya, everybody who sold things would have done so there. The bathroom is sa biyak, by the way. May Acropolis pa. Have you ever heard of the word Acropolis? Acro, taas, polis, ciudad, the high city. That's where all the temples would have been. Bet Shan is famous biblically for when Saul was killed. Hari Saul, sang patyon sa mga Philistines killed him. Ialawas, but Ialawas was hung on the walls of Bet Shan. That's the one place that it's mentioned in the Bible, but it's an incredible Roman ruin. But from Bet Shan, you head a little bit back towards the west. You're heading back towards the Mediterranean. You come to a place called Ain Harad. Ain means the spring, Bubon. This is the spring of Gideon. Kind of amazing this is still there. Do you remember what happened in Judges chapter 6 and 7? Gideon was a mighty man of valor. Paborito ko na. Kaya when Gideon was called a mighty man of valor, nago lang siya. He was hiding from the Midianites. He was terrified. The angel of God appears, mighty man of valor, you've been chosen to redeem your people. Nago lang ko. Ano sa imo? But God convinces him, nope, you've been chosen. the whole fleece thing, wet and dry, if you remember the story. He tested the Lord confirmed it. So he rallied an army. 32,000 men came to the rally cry of Gideon to face off against 130 some odd thousand Midianites. Kulang gid sigurado. They're only 1/4 the amount of people contrary to them. But God said, damos inyo. If you win the battle with 32,000, you'll think you got the victory. Anybody who is afraid, kung kobalaan sila, pwede mapulit na lang. 22,000 went home. Jace mobilin. God said, no, that's too many. Why don't you go to the spring and everybody get a drink? If they put their mouth straight in the water, puli lang sila. If they cup their hands and drink from their hand, akong pilit na lang. 300 lang bilin. Now, I do like this. There are those who say that the 300 were the most alert. They were the ones who were ready. They didn't stick their mouth in the water. They're watching for the enemy. They're prepared for whatever may come. Basi na lang. I kind of like to think, basi kay tigo lang sila. Ang mga hoben went right into the water. Magatigo lang, like, wala lang anay. Sakit akong likod. Oh, okay, there we go. Yep, water. Okay, bring it up, sip from it. And God chose the oldest, most feeble, least likely to be powerful in battle, because God chooses the foolish, that no flesh may glory in His presence. 300 picked there at the springs of Gideon to fight against the Midianites. Amazing, because the spring, asusubang arapa. Now, from the spring of Gideon, by the way, don't drink from that. Tubig kalayan na. Tsura lang. It's green gate, it's not good anymore. I wouldn't recommend it. They kind of warn you that's not good to drink from, but it's still there. No, don't drink from that. You go about another half hour to the west, and you come to a place called Tel Megiddo. Now, the city of Megiddo was one of the most important in Israel. Here's why. Israel is sa tunga sa kalibutan. Kung nara ka sa Africa, and you want to go to Asia, how do you get there? Alin ka Israel. If you're in Europe and you want to go to Africa, ano yung maagyan? What's your way? How do you travel? Through Israel. In fact, if you want to go anywhere in the world, where do you have to pass by? Israel. It's literally the center of the world. Quite literally, quite figuratively. And that's the location, why God chose it, why it's so important. And in the middle of Israel is Megiddo. It sits on what they call the Via del Mar, the way of the sea. Every major invading army in all of history, whether you're talking about the pharaohs, whether you're talking about Alexander the Great, whether you're dealing with the Roman Empire, everybody passed through Megiddo, which is why the city has been destroyed and rebuilt 17 times. But it's an important historical location because of where it is, but it's also got some incredible ruins. It's the location of the horses of Solomon. For Solomon, damo mga kabayo, he added, by the way, the kings were told in Deuteronomy chapter 17, don't add wives, don't add horses, don't add money. What did Solomon add? Mga kabayo, kwarta, kag, asawa. So everything the Bible told him not to do, he did, which is what got him into trouble. But his horses he kept in Megiddo, and they have the ruins there, by the way, of the stalls. You can see the horse stalls from the time of Solomon. There also, by the way, is a beautiful, huge well. It goes down sobra 150 meters into the ground. King Ahab dug this so there was water inside of the city if anyone ever besieged it. They closed off the city. He dug this incredible cistern, this well that brought water inside. Asusubong, it's still there. You could still go down into it. Quite amazing. But the most important thing about Megiddo for us, that's the city, that's the view, that's the tell, is where it is. For it sits in the valley of Megiddo. What's another name for the valley of Megiddo? Har Megiddo, or Armageddon. This is the valley of Armageddon. So when you talk about the return of Jesus Christ, when He comes back, Revelation chapter 19, with that name Apa'ani, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And he comes down upon the Mount of Olives, cracks it in two according to Zechariah chapter 14. Water, may tubig sagwat, feeds into the Dead Sea, giving it life. And he turns to us, kay kita. We come with him according to Jude chapter 1 verse 14. He turns to us and says, wala ka mo diyanay, mabalik lang ko. And he heads off to Armageddon, where the Antichrist and all of his army have gathered together to fight against the Lord. Now, not to be anticlimactic, but do you know that Armageddon is not much of a battle? According to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8, Jesus says one word. Isa kabulang na lang, one word, patay sila tanan. It's over. That's Armageddon. It's not so much the battle, it's just the end of the Antichrist in his 7-year reign and the beginning of the 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ. And it happens right there in the valley of Megiddo. Well, from there, we went all the way back to the coast to a place called Caesarea Maritime. Another, by the way, beautiful Roman city, built by Herod the Great around the time of the birth of Jesus, or slightly before. It's got a theater again, gorgeous theater. Asa Subang, they still use it. You can seat about 5,000-6,000 people. Famous for Acts chapter 12. The story is good. Herod, this is Herod Agrippa I. Herod, the grandson of Herod the Great, comes into the theater. And the people of Tyre and Sidon have gathered and they want to make him happy. So they begin to praise him. As Herod speaks, they go, it's the voice of a God and not of a man. The voice of a God and not of a man. And Herod receives it. Now get the picture. Because sa likod dara is the Mediterranean Sea. Beautiful backdrop. Gorgeous ocean. Herod, medyo tambok siya. He was kind of a big man, kind of round. Walks in with a silver dress on, according to Josephus, the first century historian. Have you ever seen a disco ball? Bright, shiny, lights reflecting all off of it. This is Herod. He walks in, he's fat, he's got a silver gown on, he's a disco ball walking in. And as he walks in, the people start to praise him. Look, he's a God, not a man. He's a God, not a man. And he allowed the praises of men to be heard and received by him. And God smote him right there on the spot. We're told Josephus gives us the details. Worms ate him from the inside out. It took 5 days for him to die as his insides poured out from within him. Painful, gruesome death. Because he did not contradict men giving him glory. That was there in Caesarea Maritime at the theater. But not just the theater, there's a beautiful location behind it. This is where Paul would have been held in prison for 3 years in Acts chapters 25, 26, and 27. When he stood before Felix, Festus, and Agrippa. That's all here in Caesarea Maritime. When he set off on his journey to Rome, when he appealed to Caesar, he would have left from Caesarea Maritime. They even found a stone there with the name Pontius Pilate. Importante, good name. Kaliwat, amo man kay Hari David. There were many arguments over the years that Pontius Pilate was just fictional. He didn't ever really exist because they found no archaeological evidence until they uncovered a stone here at Caesarea Maritime. They uncovered that stone and they went, I told you, Pontius Pilate, he's a real guy. And the stone was found here in the ruins of Caesarea. So incredible, beautiful Roman-era ruins built by Herod the Great. And then also in Acts chapter 12 and the end of the book of Acts where Paul ultimately went on his prison journey. But there was a problem with Caesarea. Wala tubig. Naming nga syudad, dako pa, lapad. It was the seat of Roman government in Judea, but no fresh water. Herod the Great had an idea. What if I build an aqueduct 11 kilometers long from Mount Carmel all the way into the city of Caesarea? And that's what he did. He had a bridge, tay-tay na lang ni, but tay-tay para sa tubig. that brought water all the way from the springs of Mount Carmel into the city of Caesarea. And what's amazing is it still stands today. It's how well he built it. That's a 2,000-year-old aqueduct that fed water into the city of Caesarea. Gorgeous beaches, by the way. Providing fluid water, drinking water into the city of Caesarea Maritime. Absolutely beautiful beaches. Gives you an idea, aerial view of the site. 11 kilometers long. Absolutely incredible. By the way, best place to ever go on a beach day. You want to have a fun beach day? You can barbecue under a 2,000-year-old aqueduct. It's really cool, unique. Who can't do that anywhere else in the world? So, really a fun place to go and have a beach day. Well, that brought us to Jerusalem. From Caesarea, we drove up, came into the city of Jerusalem. The first thing we did, the first day we were there, we went to the Kotel, also known as the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall. Para sa mga Hudeo, this is the closest they can ever get to the holiest of all. Because the temple was destroyed. 70 AD, we'll see pictures of this in a minute. 70 AD, the Romans came in, Titus Vespasian, the 10th Roman Legion, they destroyed the second temple, what they call Herod's temple. And so therefore, they do not know where the holiest of all is. The temple hasn't been there for now almost 2,000 years. So the Jews, rather than worshiping at the temple, worship at the foundation wall that the temple used to stand upon. This is the retaining wall, the western side of it, where the Jews will go and pray to God. By the way, a sad picture. Kaya kala ko sa mga Hudeo, grabe ila tigipos, gusto si malapit sila sa Ginoo. They really want to be close to the Lord, but there's a wall between them and God. That wall is literal, but the wall is also spiritual because they do not receive Jesus Christ. Without Jesus, ari ang pader. You can try to get as close as you want, but you'll never get into the holiest of all other than through the blood of Jesus Christ. And the Jews, quite literally, worship just outside of the holiest. Lapit git sila, but they're outside the wall, worshiping and trying to pray to God. Awesome picture, powerful picture. I love that picture of them. Well, from the Western Wall, we actually went into what's called the Rabbinic Tunnels. Because Jerusalem has been destroyed, rebuilt. Destroyed, rebuilt. Destroyed, rebuilt. So the Jerusalem from Jesus' time is about 10 to 15 meters below the level of the current city. But they have excavated. They have actually gone down to the level of Jerusalem from Jesus' time. They call it the Rabbinic Tunnels. That's the Western Wall, but down deeper to the time of Jesus. Now, this is worth describing. I do want to explain what I'm looking at here. You look at the stone here. From here, kita siya ako nasawa dari sa likod. That is one stone. Isa ka bato na lang ina. It is about 10 to 12 meters long. It is 2 meters high and 3 meters thick. It is not on the ground. The ground is another 12 meters, 4 meters, about 12 feet beneath that. So it's up in the wall. They have no idea how they did that. That rock is so massive, so huge, that 2,000 years it's never been able to move. And no one's ever been able to move it. It tells you just how amazing an architect Herod the Great, because Herod the Great is who built this, was. When he designed, when he built what's called the Temple Mount, it was amazing. It has stood for 2,000 years. That's one stone in the foundation wall of the Temple Mount. But you're able to get down there, which is kind of neat. It's a lot of tunnels. If you're claustrophobic, if you don't like small, tight, enclosed spaces, do not go into the rabbinic tunnels. They're quite compact. But it is amazing to realize that you're walking on the street from the time of Jesus Christ. These are the actual streets that Jesus would have walked on. This is Jerusalem from 2,000 years ago. Now, from the rabbinic tunnels, we did stop by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. You're familiar with that? If you have a Catholic background, or if you are Lutheran or Presbyterian, damo by the way, it's not just Catholic, this is the traditional site of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. I tend to not believe it's the actual location. It's traditional. It doesn't seem to fit necessarily all of the evidence, but there are those who believe that that's the spot. So we stopped by just to kind of see it. What we believe is the spot is what we call the Garden Tomb. Now, the Garden Tomb is amazing. If you go out the northern gate of Jerusalem, called the Damascus Gate, and you go about 200-300 meters, there's a little garden right by the Arab bus station. Now, the Arab bus station actually sits at the bottom of a place that looks like a skull. It's kind of hard to see it now because the years have worn it away. You can see the buses down here. That's the Arab bus station. But if you look at this, may duwa ka mata, bit of a nose here. It's actually clear in the picture. But this has been known for years as Golgotha, the place of the skull. It's thought that this is what Jesus would have been crucified in front of, by the way. We often think of him sa baba sa bukid. That's not where they would have crucified somebody. When Romans crucified, tupad sa dalan. Because the idea was to intimidate the population. Don't mess with Rome. Don't break the law. Because if you do something we don't like, that's going to be you up on a cross. So they would put it, tupad gid sa dalan, sa tanantan ng mga tao kung paglabay sila, pwede makita. So Jesus, the thought is, would have been crucified, kay may dalan dara, halin sa daan, for many, many years since the time of Jesus. There's been a road there. They would have been crucified by the road there at Golgotha, the place of the skull. And then right by there, there's a little garden. And in that garden, there is a tomb cut into the wall. A tomb in which there is no body. Because he is not there. Naban Hausha, he is risen. Kind of special, by the way, to go into it. Let me get it for you. Hold on a second. Yep, there it is. That's inside of the garden tomb. Super sweet to see it. I mean, it's the only time you ever walk into a cemetery, into a grave and go, man, I'm so blessed. There's nothing in here. It's awesome. This is empty. It's perfect. Because it's what tells us death is not the end. Jesus conquered the grave, conquered sin, conquered death, and we have the guarantee of eternal life with our God forever through the picture of the cross. So Garden Tomb, absolutely remarkable place to go. You do communion there, worship there, just a phenomenal, phenomenal ministry. It's a non-for-profit, by the way. It's an organization that owns it, a Christian organization. Wala bayad, libre lang. Anybody basta sino pwede masulod. Come in and you just worship and remember that Jesus is not dead. He is alive. And then we finish off that day by actually going to church. Now, this is kind of interesting. Kung nara ka sa Israel, ang simba sa mga Christians man, hindi sa Domingo sa aga. Masimba sila sa Biyernes sa gabi. That is their main service. They follow the Shabbat. The Shabbat is from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. That is the Jewish day off. Kung nara ka sa Israel sa Domingo, obra ka. That's the first day of the week. Everybody works, that's the Jewish Monday. Everybody goes back to work on Sunday. Your day off is Friday afternoon all the way through Saturday evening. That's your day off. That's your weekend. And so church is on a Friday night. So on Friday night, we go to church and we worship and have a service and have the Shabbat. We light the Shabbat candles, and it's an awesome, beautiful time of coming together with believers. They're Jewish, Judeo sila, pero they believe in the Messiah. And we come together and worship our Lord in Jerusalem. Absolutely phenomenal, amazing time. Just a great opportunity to worship with Jewish brothers and sisters. There we are. Muted. Saturday morning. It's the Shabbat. Tanan-tanan sarado. Even the street lights, they turn off. Nothing works. Everybody in Jerusalem, pahawai sila, because it's the Sabbath. What do? you go south. You head down towards the Dead Sea. As we're leaving the city, we stop by Mount Scopus. Mount Scopus, even sounds like what it is, like a telescope, is the overview of the city of Jerusalem. That's my daughter actually with binoculars looking down on the city. But it overlooks the Temple Mount. You look down upon the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, beautiful overlook of the city. From the Mount of Olives, we went down to the Dead Sea. First thing we did, stopped off and got some gas and rode a camel. Because you're in the desert, and when you're in the desert, ride camels. The Dead Sea, by the way, is 500 meters below sea level. Sea of Galilee, 200 meters. Dead Sea, 500 meters. It's the lowest place on earth. Very hot, by the way. Grabe, and it gets a Dead Sea. But wala balas. You don't sweat because there's no moisture in the air. It's so dry. The moment you sweat, it just evaporates. Grabe, and it wala sweat. But riding a camel, well, it's pretty fun, actually. It's quite entertaining. I have to admit, as fun as it was riding camels, it was more fun to watch Miss Emily ride a camel. She was very much the entertainment on a camel. She was hysterical. But from the camel, from the gas station, we went to a place called Qumran. Now, Qumran is one of the most important places you will ever see. For it is where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. And Dead Sea Scrolls. Do you remember what the Dead Sea Scrolls are? Okay. History. Tanan-tanan aton Bible. All of our Bibles in the Old Testament come from something called the Masoretic text. The Masoretic text is a 1,000-year-old copy of the Jewish Bible. It's only 1,000 years. Isa kalibot katuwig na lang. When they found the Dead Sea Scrolls back in 1946, there was a little shepherd boy. He was Arab. His bantay lang, nakakanding siya. He had the goats he was watching. They ran off, and he thought one of them might be in the caves up in the hills around Qumran. And so he threw rocks up into the caves to see if he could scare a goat out. Rather than a goat, he heard the shattering of a clay jar. When he went to see what had broken, he found the most important archaeological find in history. He found entire, complete copies of the Old Testament that were 2,000 years old. So mind you, all of our Bibles come from a copy that's 1,000 years old. He found copies that were 2,000 years old, predating even Jesus Christ being on earth. Now the big question was, tanan-tanan mga taong, gusto sila kabalo, ano dako nga diferensya between the 1,000-year-old copy and the 2,000-year-old copy? How much had the Bible changed? Because there's the argument. The argument is we believe the Bible is the Word of God. How do we know it hasn't changed? Maybe it was the Word of God sa una gid, but it was written 3,000 years ago. Moses, David, those are 3,000 plus years ago. How do we know that what they wrote is what we have today? We only have a 1,000-year-old copy. How do you know it hasn't changed? Suddenly you now have a 2,000-year-old copy to compare it to. How much has time affected the Word? The difference? None. They were the same. In fact, when you go to Qumran, we'll show you pictures here in a minute of the scrolls they found there. The scroll of Isaiah, which is 20 meters long. Isa ka libro na lang, one book, Isaiah, 20 meters long and about 24 inches high. You can read it if you understand Hebrew. If you can read Hebrew, you can read it to this very day, and it reads just like the Bible reads in the Hebrew modern. There is no difference. God preserves His Word, and it's Qumran where they found it. It's kind of fun. You get to hike up to the caves. It's a nice hike, by the way. Super, super nice. That's Pastor Bim Bim from Himam Island, Buang siya. He believes in standing on cliffs for some reason. He gets good views, though. But this is the ruins of it's like a community called the Essenes. They were the ones that actually wrote the scrolls back 2,000 years ago, and the ruins of their village are still there today. Beautiful, beautiful sight in Qumran. From there, you go south Pagid. You're heading down the Dead Sea. You come to a place called En-Gedi. Do you remember the name En-Gedi? Have you ever heard that before? For Hari David, when he was hiding from Saul, hid in the wilderness of En-Gedi. This is where David hid from King Saul. Because, palibot gid, everywhere around you, wala tubig. Wala tanom. It's hot, it's dead, it's desert. The Dead Sea, if you drink that, you die. The Dead Sea is deadly water to drink. So there's nothing to survive, nothing to live off of, and suddenly there's a little canyon, and when you follow the canyon, it's quite a hike, by the way. It's not an easy hike. You hike about 2 kilometers back up into it. Damo mga tanom, there's suddenly plants everywhere. Bugnaw pa. The temperature drops 10, 15 degrees. Damo tubig. Damo inom. Whatever you want, more than enough. Damo mga sapa. May mga kanding, may mga laga. Dako ang laga. You can eat those, by the way. I don't know if you want to eat those, but you can. Pwede. Dako sila. Maybe they're tasty. I don't know. I wouldn't try. But damo kaon. There's lots to eat. It could easily keep you fine and healthy for long periods of time. And this is where David hid out from Saul. Now, Saul did find him. If you remember the story from 1 Samuel, si David, nako lang sa kuweba, ara siya sa likod. Si Saul nagsulod, he comes into that very cave para maihi siya. He go to the bathroom. It was his CR. Wala kabalo, si David sa likod, kay dalonggid. And turns around, Saul's probably, compromised. He's not guarding himself because he's pasit muson siya. And his men tell David, here's your opportunity, kill him. I mean, he's going to the bathroom. That's a really easy way to kill somebody. And David said, no, I will not touch God's anointed. The Lord will deal with him. And he come up and he cut off the corner of Saul's garment. Wala kabalo siya, Saul, he didn't know. Cut off the corner of his garment and let Saul leave. When Saul had gone out of the cave, David held up the corner and said, Saul, look, God gave you into my hand, but I did not harm you. And Saul said, you're more righteous than I am. And Saul gave up chasing David for a while because of what he did here in the wilderness of En-Gedi. Beautiful location, by the way. Actually, the mga taga-Israel, kada Sabado, pakata sila dara. They all go there because it's just such a beautiful place. Really, truly a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous location. Well, from En-Gedi, we go down to Masada, so South Pagid. You're going down the Dead Sea. Masada is the fortress of Herod the Great on the Dead Sea. It's impressive, by the way. That's Masada. So, the Dead Sea's in the background. It's about 400 or 500 meters high. All around it is cliffs. And on top of it is an impenetrable fortress. Like you cannot get an army up there. There's no way to march an army up to the top, which is why Herod the Great built himself a palace there. And he built himself quite the palace. The way you get up there now, it's cable car. You can run up it. Actually, I was there in 2013. Just kay testing lang ko, dalagan lang. I ran up what they call the snake trail. Took me 25 minutes. Dalagan, wala unta. It's that long of a trail running, it takes you still 25 minutes to get to the top. It's quite the path. Cable car takes you 5 minutes, it's much easier. Because what Herod did, and it's incredible by the way, so you have a fortress that he built cascading down the face of the cliffs. And then up top, he had hot and cold baths, like a spa in the middle of the wilderness 2,000 years ago. Grabe, Herod the Great. It was unbelievable. Damo tubig pa. There's no water anywhere around there, but he built cisterns. So when it does rain, maybe it rains once a year, tanan-tanan mga ulan, all gets channeled into these massive caverns. So sobra-sobra ila tubig. They have more than enough water for hundreds of people on the top. And it was, again, unconquerable. There was no way up there. Which is why when Jerusalem fell in 70 AD, 1,000 Jews, men, women, and children, nagnagot sila sa babaw, sa Masada. They thought, no one can get us up here. We have sobra tubig, damo gid, damo ila pagkaon pa. And how could the Roman army ever get them? Because it was indestructible. There's no way to get up there. So the Romans came. In fact, you can still see their camps. Asa Subang, you see the outlines of the Roman camps all around Masada they set up. 10th Roman Legion said, nope, we're not allowing any Jews to rebel. They were done with the Jews. Your rebellion's over. They'd already destroyed the temple. They destroyed Jerusalem, and they were going to destroy these Jews as well. But how do you get up to the top of Masada? They had an idea. What they did was, back up a slide here, I'll show you. Sa kilid na lang. Do you see this right here? That's not natural, that's man-made. They took about a year using Jewish slaves captured from Jerusalem, and they built a massive ramp up the side of Masada so they could march up and conquer and take the fortress. The day that they came to the walls, the Jews knew they had a choice. The choice was this: buwas sa aga, mga taga-Roma, they're going to come through. They're probably going to kill the men. They will do very bad things to the women. And our children will become slaves and probably never know the God of Israel. So if we do nothing, we will lose our identity. Okon, we can all die right now. We can die as free men and free women. So they made a decision. They would rather die than be slaves. Every man left the synagogue. There's still a synagogue there. Every man left the synagogue, went to his house. Beginning with his youngest child, working his way up, till his wife being the last one, he killed his whole family. Tanan sila. Killed the youngest first so they didn't have to see it. The wife would be the last to go. Once they'd killed all of their families, they came back to the synagogue. They wrote their names on a piece of pottery. They then drew lots to see who would be the last man. And they killed one another so that no one had to commit suicide until there was just one man left, and the very last man was the only one to take his own life. So when the Romans came through the next morning to conquer, they did not find a city full of Jews, they found a graveyard. Now, the reason why Masada is important, every Jew has to go there. For the cry of the Jews is never again. Never again will we ever allow ourselves to be in a place where we have to choose between freedom and death. Every soldier goes there. Every Jew goes there. Every school child goes there. Because this is the heart of the Jewish people. They refuse, although unfortunately it will not be the case, to ever be in the same circumstances Masada was. It's kind of a humbling place, but a powerful place to see, to understand who the Jews are. Well, from Masada, we kind of wind down a bit and we head down to the Dead Sea, which you've been watching all day, but this is the first time we go in. Now, the Dead Sea is fun. Because the Dead Sea is 30 times saltier than the ocean. So, you get in the water. Okay? It's not sand, it's salt. You're walking on chunks of salt. Make sure you have zapatos, because it's actually quite sharp. So you walk out in the salt, and you lay down in the water, boop, you float. Instantly you float. You float so much as you try to stand up again, and di pwede matindog. You can't get your feet back under you because you're so buoyant. It's quite entertaining, by the way. The first time people go out into it, I always smile. Go float. It's fun. It's easy. So let's see this too big. They lay down. Tindog ka. Pastor, hindi pa matindog ko. I go, I know. It's fun to watch you, though. It's entertaining to see him try. You can't stand up because you're just so floaty, so buoyant in the water. Dead Sea, quite amazing to see. Beautiful, by the way. It's gorgeous. But dead. No fish, no plants, no life whatsoever, because it's just salt. Now, here's the picture, by the way. The Sea of Galilee, damo isda. Everything's alive in the Sea of Galilee. The water that flows into that is the same water that flows into the Dead Sea. There's no difference. The rivers flow into, from Mount Hermon, the Hatspani, the Banyas, the Dan River flow into the Sea of Galilee, buhi patanan. The Jordan River flows out of the Sea of Galilee, amoman, the same tubig, flows into the Dead Sea, tanang patay. Why does everything die in the Dead Sea when it lives in the Sea of Galilee? There's only one difference. The Sea of Galilee has water coming in and water going out. The Dead Sea has water coming in, nothing going out. And welcome to one of the neatest pictures in all of Israel. For if all we ever do is receive and we never pour back out, we die. It is spiritual death. We are not called to receive, we're called to pour back out. And that's the Sea of Galilee compared to the Dead Sea. Powerful, powerful picture, by the way. Well, the next morning, we had the chance to go to the Israeli Museum, the most amazing museum in the world, by the way. First of all, you see Sarikod, the picture in the background there? That's the top of the museum that holds the Dead Sea Scrolls. They made it look like the top of the clay jars that the scrolls were found in. And as we mentioned, this is the actual scroll of Isaiah right there. So that's the Churo sa Sulod sa museum where the Dead Sea Scrolls are. That wrap around right there, sa tunga, that is the scroll of Isaiah. 20 meters long. 2,000-year-old copy of the book of Isaiah. Amazing to read it, incredible to see it. There, the Dead Sea Scrolls. They also have a model of the city of Jerusalem from the time of Jesus. So if you want to know what Jerusalem looked like in Jesus' time, incredible place to go and see it. Sa likod sa aton dara, you can see in the back of us, that's the Temple Mount with the temple on top. Solomon's portico is at the far side of it with all the columns. Amazing looking there. And they also have artifacts. This is the actual stone that says Pontius Pilate, governor of Judea. It's not a copy. This is the stone they actually found that actually says that Pontius Pilate ruled and reigned Judea in the days of Jesus. And there's some fun stuff too. This is the horns of what they call Aranus. I forget the name of it. It's a cow, extinct now, that lived in Israel back in the days of Job. Job actually mentioned these things by name, which is kind of incredible. Massive, massive, probably 2,000 kilo cow that would live back in the times of Job, and they actually have the ruins of it there. Kind of fun to see it. All that's in the Israeli Museum, an amazing place to go and see all of the artifacts. And then sa hapon, we went to Yad Vashem. Have you ever heard of the Holocaust? Sadly, and this is unfortunate, we do not teach enough about what the Holocaust was. You go in here, you weep. I don't care who you are, you weep. It is the saddest thing you will ever see because it shows a side of humanity you didn't know existed. This is not bad people, this is not mean people, this is wickedness. Like the world had never ever seen before, and unfortunately, we'll one day see again in the time of the Antichrist. For Hitler and the Nazi Empire decided that Jews needed to be exterminated and systematically wiped out 6 million men, women, and children. And the way they did so was calculated and brutal. They dehumanized them first. They said Jews are not equal to the rest of us. They're greedy. They take over. They try to control the world. They demonize them. Then they labeled them. If you were a Jew, you had to wear a patch. You had a Star of David that said you were different. You demonized them. You segregated them. Then they isolated them to execute them. They trucked them into what they called concentration camps. They were death camps. They were bringing them in on trains by the hundreds. People would walk off. Wala ka pala sila. They were innocent. They had no idea what was going to happen. They would say, strip all of your clothes off. Men, women, children, tanling mo bayo, wat na lang. They would put their shirts in one pile, pants in one pile, shoes, mga rilo, mga kalobes, kanano, all put in piles. Hublas pa sila tanan. They would walk into a room. They would say, you're going in to get a shower. Maligo lang ka mo. When they walked in, the doors would close. Puno-puno gid. They were packed inside. It wasn't water. It was cyanide gas. Within 2 minutes, they'd all suffocated to death. Men, women, children dead. They would open it back up, air it out, Right next to that was a crematorium. They would pull the bodies out, throw them into furnaces, burn them up, reset the room, bring in the next group. And by this, they were able to wipe out, in a matter of a couple of years, 6 million people. There's one room at the Holocaust Museum. It's a hard room to go into. It's underground. It's called the Memorial of the Children. There's a single candle in the middle of a dark room. The entire room is made of mirrors. Kisame, ding ding, sulog, talang, espiyo. So that one candle reflects back infinitely in every direction. You feel like you're walking into a star field. Tama-tama nga sugat, pero there's only one light in the middle. As you stand there, there's a catwalk around the middle of it. They read off the names, ages, and nationalities of all 1.5 million children wiped out in the Holocaust. Again, it's a wickedness that you never would have thought it existed. It's not an easy place to go, to be honest, but it's necessary. If you want to understand Israel, you have to go there. Yad Vashem means remember their name. Yad means remember, Shem means name. Remember their names. In fact, when you're walking out, they have pictures just of different people. They change it out every day. They just constantly are changing them out, the different pictures of the people who lost their lives to the Holocaust. But as hard and as evil as this was, this is why Israel exists. This is where you do get a picture that God uses all things. What man means for evil, God uses for good. For the Jews could have gone back to Israel any point in time. Israel was actually opened back up to Jews in 1918. Pero hindi ko sa sila mahalin kay namin ila balay. They had wonderful houses in Germany, in Europe, in Russia. Why would you leave that? No one wanted to go. It was the Holocaust that finally forced the Jews to say, no, we need to return to our homeland. It was this that caused the rebirth of the nation in 1948. So as hard as it was the rebirth of Israel. That night we got to go to a really cool thing called the Spectacular, the Night Spectacular. So you go into what's called the Citadel of David there by the Jaffa Gate, and they actually project onto the walls the history of Jerusalem. It's incredibly impressive. So they map the projection on the projectors onto the walls of the fortress and change it out as they're going through the temple period on through to the Muslim period. So you get to see the whole history of Israel played out before you. Super, super cool, super neat. Well, the next morning, early, aga gid, we went down to the Temple Mount. Now, this is probably the most important site that you go to in Israel. Because this is what it's all around. This is what it's all about. The most important piece of real estate on earth is the roughly 8 to 10 hectares that are what we call the Temple Mount. Christianity says it's important. In Islam, it's the third holiest site in Islam. For the Jews, it is the holiest site. It is where the first temple and the second temple stood. Solomon's temple, Herod's temple, all were here. Now, Subong, ano dere? What's behind us? Ano nalanina? Do you know what that's called? Big golden dome. Ano nalanina? It is the Dome of the Rock. That actually is not the holiest site in Islam. That's a monument. Hamo sa mga taga-Islam, that there's a rock underneath that is the pinnacle, the top of Mount Moriah. They say that is where Abraham offered para sa ila, Ismail, but we say, it's actually Isaac was offered there. And it's also where they say Muhammad made his night ride when he went to heaven. So they revere that as a memorial. That's why it's got a golden dome over the top. But actually, the Dome of the Rock is not what's important. Sa likod sa Dome of the Rock, may gamay nga dome. Ang nalandara is the Dome of the Spirits. Here's why it's important. So here's the Temple Mount. Off to the left here, by the way, is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Simbahan na lang. It's actually in the southern end of the Temple Mount. That's their third holiest site, actually, is Al-Aqsa Mosque. Here you have the Dome of the Rock. So tunga na lang, that's where they say there's the rock that Abraham was offering Isaac on. But notice up here, further up, there's a little itty bitty dome right there. That's the Dome of the Spirit. Why that's important is the Dome of the Rock does not line up with the Golden Gate, or the Gate Beautiful, the only gate on the eastern side of the city. If you look where the Golden Gate lines up with, it lines up perfectly with the Dome of the Spirits. Meaning, because in the time of Solomon, in the time of Jesus, the temple would have lined up perfectly from the Golden Gate, which is right here, all the way through the gate of the temple into the holiest of all, that this is not where the holiest was. The holiest was right here. So when you stand underneath the Dome of the Spirits, what you're standing in is the holiest of all. You are standing in the place where the Ark of the Covenant once stood, where the presence of God and the mercy seat was. Quite an amazing place to stand, by the way. Now, what's interesting about that is also, if that is, and I do believe it is, where the holiest of all is located, you can rebuild a third temple without ever touching the Dome of the Rock. Because that's the big question. The Jews want to rebuild the temple. Pero paano? How can they do so? Because if you destroy the Dome of the Rock, 1 billion Muslims get very upset with you. You don't want to upset 1 billion Muslims. You don't have to destroy it. You build to the north of it where the temple used to stand. Which is exactly, by the way, what the Antichrist will do when he rises to power. This gets heavy. For we know, according to Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, that the Antichrist, the man of sin, the man of perdition, will make a covenant with Israel for 7 years. He'll make a covenant by rebuilding their temple. He will build a temple there, doesn't have to destroy the Dome of the Rock. He'll make peace and safety, according to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 1 through 3, with the whole world, and he will stand in that spot and proclaim himself as God, which is the abomination of desolation. That is an amazing piece of real estate. It is where the Ark of the Covenant used to stand in the days of Solomon. It's where Jesus went and did ministry when he was here on earth. It's where the Antichrist will perform the abomination of desolation. It is where Jesus, when he returns, will build the fourth temple. There's 4 in all. Solomon, Herod, the Antichrist, that one will be destroyed. The millennial temple, where Jesus will rule and reign in his millennial kingdom. All in that spot. Quite the amazing location. Well, just north of that location, you have the pools of Bethesda, which is where the lame man was healed in John chapter 5. Remember, he said, basta may angel nagyo-giyo sa nasa tubig, he makes the water stir. I can't get in time because I can't walk. And Jesus said, well, if you want to, tindag ka and walk. That was there at the pools of Bethesda. So asusubang arapa. This is where, by the way, they would have cleaned the animals for the sacrifices. It's also known as the sheep gate or the sheep pool. So this is where they would have prepared the offerings for the tabernacle. There is, by the way, a really cool church next to it. It's got awesome acoustics. You can go in there and sing. Absolutely beautiful. Right there at the pools of Bethesda. Nearby, it was actually closed when we were there, but you do have the Herodian mansions, which are on the slopes looking over the Temple Mount. It's where the rich houses, mga mangaranan would have lived there. Their homes had 30 ka kwarto. Isa ka balay, 30 rooms. Mangaranan gitsa. Very, very wealthy homes there overlooking the Temple Mount. And also Solomon's quarries are right by there, where you can actually see where Solomon cut out the stones for the first temple. Kind of amazing to see. You can actually find and see where they actually did that. From there, though, you go out the southern gate of the city, the Dung Gate, to the city of David. Now, the most amazing part about the city of David, you do have the palace of David, but you also have Hezekiah's tunnel. According to Isaiah chapter 37, when the Assyrians came and besieged the city of Jerusalem, they were worried, wala tubig sa syudad. How do we get the Gihon spring, which was a source of water, into the city? And Hezekiah had this idea. What if we dig a channel 250 meters through solid bedrock? It's 200 meters below ground level. It's 250 meters long through solid rock. And they chiseled it with handheld tools to allow the Gihon spring water to flow from the pool of Siloam into the city of Jerusalem. And it's still there today. When you walk through, grabe ka sadya kay kung wala sugat, dolom gid. Like there is no light at all. And the tubig, depende sa akon, it gets up to about here on me. Now, taas ko. So para sa iban, it's like, tunga sila yung tsura lang up to their waist na lang. You're actually walking through water, still flows through it. It's really cold water too. It's about 17 degrees, the water inside. So amazing. Still there, 2,500 years ago, you still have Hezekiah's tunnel there to this day. You see us there in the tunnels. And then it comes out at the Pool of Siloam. Now, the Pool of Siloam is John chapter 9. May isa katao, bulag siya, hindi pa nakita. And Jesus said, go wash in the Pool of Siloam. The Pool of Siloam is at the southern portion of the city of David, where the Gihon spring comes out of Hezekiah's tunnel, and it was the beginning, actually, of where you would make your ascent, your climb up to the temple. So this is the beginning of the Pilgrim's Way, where you first come to the city, you would drink from the pool, and then you would climb up to the steps of David. Which is what we do. We go from the Pool of Siloam, Pasakakita, we climb up Mount Ophel, up the city of David, to the steps of David. Which, kita sa likod may mga bato. Lakogid pa. These rocks have been there for 2,000 years. They are the stones from the second temple thrown down by the Romans when they destroyed the building in 70 AD. Remember in Matthew chapter 24, Jesus and the disciples are on the Mount of Olives, which is sa piak na lang, it's opposite of the Temple Mount. You're looking across the Kidron Valley over the Temple Mount, and the disciples go, look at the building. The temple, Lord, it's so beautiful, so amazing. Ang sabat ni Jesus sa ila, not one stone will remain upon another that is not thrown down. Asa subang ara pa, those are the stones thrown down by the Roman soldiers from the destruction of the temple in 70 AD in fulfillment of the prophecy of Jesus Christ. Well, from there we crossed over to Mount Zion, which is to the west of the Temple Mount. You kind of climb up a bit of a hill and you come over a little bit to the western side of the city, and that's where you find the upper room. So kind of amazing. This is, by the way, 10th century. This is about a 1,000-year-old building. So this is not a 2,000-year-old room. It's more of a modern Crusader-era structure. But it was built on what traditionally was known to be the upper room from the time of Jesus. So this is the traditional location of that place where Jesus would have had the Last Supper, celebrated the Passover meal with his disciples just before his betrayal and crucifixion. So where Judas dipped the bread with Jesus and the Lord said, go and do what you must. And Judas had Satan enter him and he left the room. And then Jesus said, this is my body, this is my blood. He took the bread, he took the wine. That would have taken place right here in the upper room. Which from there, you go over to a place called Peter and Calacanto, also known as Caiaphas' house. For Jesus, having left the upper room, went over to the Garden of Gethsemane, was there betrayed by Judas Iscariot after he prayed to the Lord. And he was taken to Caiaphas' house where he was judged. Sino po sa iya? Sino sunod? Only one person went with Jesus to Caiaphas' house. Who went with him? Peter. Because Peter said, Lord, I will never betray you. Lord, I would go to prison. I would deny everything and I would die for you. So Peter followed Jesus. And what happened? 3 times. I do not know that man. 3 times, I have no idea who he is. The 3rd time, he cursed, according to Luke 22. He swore, took an oath, I have never, ever seen that man. The rooster crows. Jesus turns and looks at him. This is in Luke 22, by the way. The 3rd time Jesus looked right at Peter. Peter realized he just messed up, broken, went out, thinking he was done. Of course, he wasn't. This was God preparing Peter for all that was to come, teaching him not to trust in himself, but instead to be restored when he met him again in John 21, there by the Sea of Galilee. But all that would have been there at Caiaphas' house, at Peter in Calacanto. Now, this is a humorous picture I just got to show you. This is not playing in reverse. Everybody was walking in reverse. Because this was a day in Jerusalem when we walked 25 kilometers to go see all the sights. We walked from morning till night, and by this point, kapoy gid sa ila. So nalakat sila sa likod na lang. Because sakit ila tuhod. I thought it was just amazing. It was funny. They just were just exhausted because it's been a long, long day. But we finished up the day going to the Mount of Olives, to the Garden of Gethsemane. And this, by the way, is where they have 2,000-year-old olive trees. These trees were planted when Jesus was on earth. Asa sumang ara pa sila, buhi pa sila. Olive trees can be very, very, very old. And so it's amazing. The garden is still there. The trees are still there. This is where Jesus prayed for not His will, but the Father's will to be done. Which brings us to our trip out as we're leaving Jerusalem, heading back to the airport. We did stop by rather quickly, a couple of places. This is the Valley of Elah. Kabalo ka mo no natabot sa Valley of Elah? They're giving you a hint with what they're doing. May tirador sila. This is where David faced Goliath. This is 1 Samuel chapter 17. This is actually the valley where the Philistines would have been on one side, the Jews on the other. So ito nga, Goliath, ang gigante, would come out and say, who will face me? And I'll send your best warrior. And of course, David came out and defeated him there in the Valley of Elah, making him famous amongst Israel as he began to rise up as the new king and leader. By the way, when I come sa Israel, kung baka sa Valley of Elah, it is the best place to give the cheapest souvenirs you'll ever find. You find 5 smooth stones. Now, mga bata pa, I'm pretty sure they refill them every year. They just keep dumping new stones there. But pick up 5 smooth stones, and you've got 5 stones from the riverbed in the Valley of Elah. Great souvenirs to have. And we also passed by Bet Shemesh on our way out, which is where Samson faced off against the Philistines and where the Ark of the Covenant stood in the days of the judges. Well, that brings us to the airport as we headed off to Turkey. Tapos nasa Israel. Questions, by the way, I should offer that opportunity. May pamangko ka mo? Any questions about Israel before we move on? Turkey's shorter, by the way. I promise you won't be here till midnight. Hindi ba dugay? It won't be much longer, but questions before we move on to Turkey? Wala? Istanbul. We arrived at Istanbul at 4 a.m. It was a red-eye flight. Grabe, agagid. Got a couple of hours of sleep in the airport, and then we went into the city to see Hagia Sophia. Hagia, holy. Sophia, wisdom. It's the Church of Holy Wisdom. Now you can see it's sa likod. That church is 100 meters high. And it's about 150 meters across. It is huge. Now, you ready for this? It is 1,500 years old. Took the bus to get down there. Show you the picture here. This is Hagia Sophia. The inside is absolutely amazing. Huge. Built 1,500 years ago, still standing today. This was at the height of the Byzantine Empire. When Istanbul was Constantinople, when it was the heart of Christianity, this was the most amazing building that had been built ever up to that point, completely outdated. It had ever been built before that, and nothing was built better than that for over 1,000 years afterwards. This was an absolutely extraordinary piece of architecture. The marble inside, hambal nila, is actually made from the temple of Artemis. So when you get to Acts chapter 19 and you have the temple of Diana or the temple of Artemis there in Ephesus, when they destroyed that temple, and they did destroy it, they say that the marble was brought to Constantinople and used to build Hagia Sophia. So really an incredible, amazing church. Shows just how incredible the Byzantine Empire was in its heyday. Right behind Hagia Sophia is Topkapi Palace. Now Topkapi Palace is the palace of the sultans. Have any of you ever seen Aladdin? You hear about the palace of the sultans? This is the one and only palace of the sultans. This is the Ottoman Empire. This is what you talk about when you talk about the Sultan's Palace. It's Topkapi Palace. That's the one we're talking about. So quite an impressive place. This is where the Ottoman Empire ruled from for the better part of 400 years. And then across from Topkapi Palace in Hagia Sophia is the Blue Mosque. It's just some architecture. So you have Hagia Sophia, by the way, the most impressive by far of all of the structures there. Oops. Hit this. Come back. I pulled it out. Wait for it. This is where you don't touch things. No. Give me a minute. I don't know. Don't touch it again. Sorry about that. The Blue Mosque, which is there in the lower portion, is a duplicate of Hagia Sophia that the Muslims tried to build about 400 or 500 years ago to say we can make amazing things too, but it's still nothing compared to the just how incredible Hagia Sophia is. And then Topkapi Palace is Saliko, it's a Hagia Sophia. Underneath Hagia Sophia is the Basilica Cistern, also built 1,500 years ago. It's a water storage vault that can hold 2 million liters of water. And it was used, by the way, up until just a couple hundred years ago, about over 1,000 years. Again, it just shows you how incredible the Byzantine Empire was, really impressive when you're in Istanbul. And this is the Grand Bazaar, which is, if you like shopping, it's about a 2-kilometer long shopping plaza. I mean, it's a shopping paradise. If you like shopping, if you like clothing, if you like jewelry, if you like food, yeah, the Grand Bazaar, it's nice. That's all Istanbul. Not always biblical, but still amazing history. From Istanbul, we flew down. You had to fly by plane an hour to the southern portion of Turkey. And the first place we went to was the city of Ephesus. This is the biblical ruins of Ephesus. So we get the book of Ephesians. This is that city. Now, sa likod na lang, you see that beautiful building? That is the facade or the front of what they call the Celsus Library. It is the second largest library in the Roman world. The largest would have been the Library of Alexandria in Egypt. Number 2 was the Celsus Library there in Ephesus. For our purposes, though, this is where it's more important. They have a theater. But the theater in Ephesus doesn't seat 5,000. It seats 25,000 people. It is enormous. Now, that's important because if you remember in Acts chapter 19, Paul was causing problems in Ephesus. Because tanang mga tao, untat silang simba sa Diana, they stopped worshiping the fake god Diana, and they began to worship Jesus. But there was an idol maker, yan Alan Demetrius. He made money by selling mga revolto of Diana, and he said, we got to stop this Paul because he's turning the world upside down. And so they started a riot where 25,000 people filled the theater in Ephesus. That's where they filled it. And Paul, what did Paul want to do? Let me in. Let me go preach to him. I'll go tell him about Jesus. They're going, Paul, they'll kill you. This is a riotous mob. They're not going to listen. They're going to just destroy you. Paul was like, no, I can do it. I still want to preach to him. This is an opportunity. Apparently so hard on him that he wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 8, that this pressed him beyond measure, above strength, in so much that he despaired of his very life. This was a trial above all trials for Paul, because it was so hard not to go in and preach the gospel to 25,000 people who he could tell about Jesus Christ. But that was there in the theater in Ephesus. Now, what's ironic about that is, of course, the people said, great is Diana. Great is Artemis of Ephesus. That's our goddess. They're the one we worship. This is the temple of Artemis at Ephesus. All that's left is one pillar. And that they had to stand back up. So this city that said, according to Acts 19, that Artemis is great and Ephesus is amazing, Ephesus recognized eventually that Artemis was nothing, and instead they worshipped Jesus Christ. It became the seat of the church there in Asia Minor. That's where the Apostle John was a pastor during his latter years. So incredible to see how the end of it was that Jesus won, Artemis literally fell down. Although, they still sell the idols. I found that kind of humorous. 2,000 years later, they're still making idols of Diana and selling them in the gift shop, but don't buy those there. That's not a good idea. But that's Ephesus. From Ephesus, you travel about 3 hours to the east, and you come to the city of Laodicea. Now, Laodicea is in the beautiful Lycus River Valley. It's part of the Tri-Cities of Colossae, Laodicea, and Hierapolis. In fact, when you read the book of Colossians, in chapter 4, Paul says, make sure that you greet the saints in Hierapolis and in Laodicea, because the 3 cities are right there by one another. So it's the Tri-Cities in the Lycus River Valley of Hierapolis, Laodicea, and Colossae. What's amazing about Laodicea, it's the only ruins where there's a church. This is not a temple. This is a church, and it's massive. It could easily seat about 1,000 people. So Laodicea had a massive, huge church because mangaranong gid sila. They were incredibly wealthy. They sold a very rare form of black wool that was grown there in that region. The lambs had panat was itom na lang, so it was very, very fancy wool. They also sold a very expensive eye salve, a medical cure for your eyes if you had bad eyesight. So they were a very wealthy, very prominent position, making them a very big church. But a church to whom Jesus said, you think you are rich. You think you have everything. I tell you are poor, wretched, blind, miserable, and naked. And he says, buy from me salve so that you can really see. Remember they sold eye salve? He goes, buy the real salve from me because you're blind. Bulag ka mo. And he said, I wish you were either hot or cold. But you are instead lukewarm. So masukka ka. I'm going to vomit you right out of my mouth. This gets interesting. Geography again is important. When you stand in the church, so let's simbahan when you stand in the church, if you look to the left, you see white cliffs. It looks like snow. May snow dari kay init na. It's quite warm. It's probably 25, 30 degrees. It can't be snow. Why am I saying white? It's not snow. It's the white cliffs of Hierapolis that have natural hot springs. The hot springs pour over the cliffs, making them white with limestone. So if you look left, hot springs. If you look to the right, may taas ng bukid. Sobra 3,000 meters. That's Colossae. Cold water flowed down from the tall mountain of Mount Cadmus there in the city of Colossae. So Colossae has cold, refreshing water. Hierapolis, hot, therapeutic water. So ito nga, Laodicea, neither hot nor cold. And so when you're standing there, you go, ay gali. Now I get what Jesus was saying. I wish you were like Colossae. Refreshing, cold, rejuvenating. I wish you were like Hierapolis, therapeutic, healing. But you guys are just in the middle. So you are going to be spewed out of my mouth. And he goes on to say, by the way, we know the verse. I stand at the door and knock. We often use this, by the way, as an evangelical verse. It's not evangelical. Jesus is saying to a church, I'm not inside. If you guys miss me or not, but I'm no longer there. I'm on the outside and I'm knocking. If you let me in, I will come in and sup again with you. To he who overcomes, I will give the right to sit upon my throne. He who has an ear to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. That's Laodicea. Quite really an amazing ruins. Gorgeous too, by the way. Huge. You can see the church is the covered building there on the right. They've got a temple in the middle. Amazing with a huge theater there. An extraordinary ruin. But just to the left of that is the city of Hierapolis. So you have Colossae, mountain. Nothing there, by the way. There's no ruins in Colossae. Laodicea, so ito nga, beautiful ruins. And then off to the left, you have Hierapolis. Now you look, ano tsura ina? What does that look like? Ice or snow, right? It's not. That's limestone from hot springs. That is the hot springs of Hierapolis. In fact, you can see they have what they call the travertine pools. These hot springs that cascade down the cliff face, making the cliffs go white. Really, absolutely beautiful, by the way. That's the theater there, Hierapolis, beautiful ruins there in the city. We did have a fun opportunity. So someone said, hey, would you like to go for a hot air balloon ride over an ancient Roman city? I said, yes, of course. So all of us loaded onto a balloon and had the opportunity. It was really amazing, by the way, to float over for about an hour the city of Hierapolis in the hot air balloon. It was really quite extraordinary. And a couple of the guys, I didn't do this. A couple of them even went paragliding, which was pretty amazing as well. So if you want to see a biblical site, hot air balloon and paragliding, good way to do it. That was Hierapolis. Now from Hierapolis, we went around, and it's a big loop, by the way. Palibot na lang. You're just doing a big old circle. We went Ephesus, Laodicea, crossed over to Philadelphia. Now Philadelphia is not much of a ruin. There's just a couple of columns left. Of course, they were the faithful church. They were small, they weren't mighty, but there's nothing bad to be said about them because they ultimately were trusting in Jesus Christ. That's the church of Philadelphia. From there, we went to the church of Sardis. About another 45 minutes further around as you're coming around a loop, not very far away. Sardis was quite an impressive ruin. Here's why. Sardis had nothing good to be said about it. So Ephesus was the church that had no love. They were the loveless church. They were buot sila, pero wala higugma, wala palangga. Laodicea was the lukewarm church. They thought they were rich, but in truth they were poor. Philadelphia was the buot church. They were good. They were small, but they were faithful. Sardis was the dead church. They had a reputation, they were alive, but in truth they were dead. They have the largest synagogue in all of the ancient world. Outside of Israel, there's no place they've ever found a larger simbahan para sa mga Hudeo than other than Sardis. It could seat 1,000 people. Isa kaliyang katao, pwede masulod sa synagogue dira. It's huge, huge, huge building. Here's why this is kind of interesting. When you're in the book of Revelation and you deal with the 7 churches, there's 3 interpretations. What was Jesus talking about with those 7 churches? Number 1, he was talking about 7 literal churches. Tuwad gidi na. We went around and saw all 7 churches. To this day, they're still there. The locations are still there. The ruins are still there. Even in Laodicea, the church is still there. So tuod, may 7 ka simbahan. Pero, it also can talk about kinds of churches. Meaning that, subong, sa bilog sa kalibutan, may mga simbahan, Ephesus sila. Buot, pero wala palangga. Ay iban sa mga simbahan, mangaranan sila, pero they're lukewarm, they're compromised. Ang iban sa mga simbahan, buot sila pero gamay lang. They're not very big, but they're faithful. Ang iban sa mga simbahan, dead. They have a reputation. Sa nagligad, they were alive, pero subong, wala nabilin. They've lost the spark. They no longer have the life. Jesus is no longer working in them. And that's that idea of Sardis. That's that kind of church, that's a dead church. Pero may katatlo pa. This is worth mentioning. The third kind of church is the history of the churches. Meaning, and I like this by the way, the 7 churches of Revelation give the history from the first church in the book of Acts all the way through to the last church before the return of Jesus Christ. The first church being Ephesus, buot sila pero wala palangga. All the way through the last church being Laodicea, subong, mangaranan pero lukewarm, not very excited about Jesus. That's not everybody, mind you, but in the whole, that does describe the church well today. Sardis would be the Protestant Reformation. Historically, a church that had a reputation for being alive, but lost it and became dead. Went from a revival to just dead, empty tradition. That's Sardis. It's a powerful site, amazing to see. It does have a beautiful temple of Artemis there, much more complete than the one in Ephesus. Again, there's Pastor Bim Bim. He doesn't like the ground. He just likes to fly. I don't know why. He just leaps everywhere he goes. And he inspires my daughter to follow him, so She leaps along with him, go figure it out. But here you can see the overview of the site. You can see the synagogue, by the way, is the big building there in the white. That entire thing, so we can keep this from turning off, all of this is one synagogue. So it's an absolutely massive Jewish synagogue there at Sardis. Now from Sardis, you come around to the ruins of the city of Thyatira. Thyatira is the compromised church. They're the ones that had Jezebel among them. So they're the ones who were allowing false teachings into the church. So that was the city of Thyatira. And then we went from there to the city of Bergama, which is Pergamum. Pergamum is incredible. So when you're in Pergamum, may dua ka lugar. There's an Acropolis, a high city, and there's also a temple to Asclepion. More on that in a minute. In the high city, you have the ruins of the temple of Trajan, which is a beautiful temple, by the way. It's a massive temple. Trajan was an emperor of Rome. So this was the worship of men. This isn't even the worship of God anymore. This is the worship of men. So they were worshiping one of the Caesars of Rome. This is actually the foundation stones. This is actually just the building they used to put the temple above it. Absolutely huge. And at the end of it, they have this amazing tunnel that leads out into a theater that opens up on the valley. It's the most gorgeous of all the theaters you're going to see. The backdrop is just looking out over the whole valley behind you. But the most humbling thing about the Acropolis is right there. This is the temple of Zeus, there at the Acropolis at Bergama. Now, back in the day, it looked like this. This was actually removed by the Germans back at the turn of the 20th century. It now exists in a museum in Berlin. But this used to be there on this site in Bergama on the Acropolis. Here's why this is interesting. Jesus writes to the church that was there in Pergamus in Revelation chapter 2, verses 18 through 25. He says, I know where you dwell, where Satan has his seat. Let me say that again. During the time when Jesus wrote this, back 2,000 years ago, Pergamus, was where Satan literally sat. It's where Satan dwelt. He repeats it twice. Now, kabala mo. Satan is not omnipresent. Satan can only be in one place at one time. Ambot diyan subong, but somewhere on earth, Satan right now is. We don't know where today, but I can tell you that then, this is where Satan sat. How would you like to hear that? Can you imagine if someone told you, hey, by the way, church in Bacolod, I know where you dwell, where Satan has his seat. My guess would be somewhere in Golden Field, but that's a different issue. Different conversation. I mean, to think that that's Satan's location, where he physically is ruling and reigning from. Can you imagine hearing that about your church? Yet this was Bergama. It's a bit of a humbling place to go to. Obviously, Satan's no longer there. But to think that Satan was once there is quite a heavy thing. But not just up there on the Acropolis, which is, again, absolutely beautiful. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous site. Beautiful, beautiful ruins. But when you come off the Acropolis, you come down into the Asclepion. Now, let me explain this to you. Have you ever seen the symbol for a doctor? What's the symbol for a doctor? It's a pole with a snake. That is the Greek god Asclepion. That's what you're looking at. Until now, asusubong, it is a symbol for medical help. So this was a medical facility. This was the Asclepion, where they worshiped the god of healing, who was Asclepius. There's a beautiful theater there, small, maybe seats a couple thousand people only. But importantly, there was also a tunnel. This tunnel was interesting. Asusubong arapa. So it's maybe around 100 meters long. But may bahot sa babaw. You can see the little holes in the top. There's light coming through. So you would walk through. Kung lain matiyag ka, you would show up. Now I do have to say this. there's a sign there that talks about the rules of the Asclepion. Kung busong ka, if you were pregnant, you were not allowed in. Because pregnancies back in those days were a bit tough, and there was no guarantee you or your baby would make it. They didn't want to risk the gods looking bad and you dying. If you were pregnant, hindi pa masulod. Kung lapit sa patay, if you were on death's door, bawal na. They didn't want any people who were too sick coming in because, again, if you died, you'd make the gods look bad because you weren't healed. But kung may trangkaso na lang, or may apiles, pwede masulod. Come on in, the gods will heal you. And you would walk through this tunnel. And as you walk through, may mga tao sa babaw, they were on top with the holes, and they would whisper down, maayo ka na, buot ka na, guapo ka na. And they would whisper down to you, oh yeah, I'm feeling better actually. I'm feeling pretty good. Yeah, I'm feeling getting like stronger. And by the time you got to the end, oh, ayos na, you're feeling really good. You've been healed. That was the point of the tunnel. And they would give you a puting abato, a white stone, to show that you had been healed. This is the Asclepion. This is what they used to do. Now, when you get to Revelation 2, Jesus talking to the church saying, hey, I know you where Satan dwells. I know that you remain faithful. I know you've been good. To he who overcomes, I will give a white stone on which a name is written that no man knows but me. And you read that and you go, what's with the white stone? It's the Asclepion. He's making this comparison. You know how men say they can heal you, but not really. I'm the one who truly heals. I'll give you the real white stone that says I'm going to give you a new name. For 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17, we are new creations in Jesus Christ. You go there and you go, I get it. Again, I get it. Jesus was using the picture, the reference from the place to be able to talk about how to minister to the people that were there. And that's the site itself. You can kind of see the overview. That is the Asclepion there in Bergama. And then the seventh and final church, wrapping it up, you come back to the same place you entered at, the city of Izmir, which is biblical Smyrna. Now, Smyrna is the persecuted church. Again, nothing bad to say about them, because budlay para sa ila. Which probably is a lesson, by the way. For we think, mas mayo kung wala problema sa mong kabuhi, atong kabuhi. Kung tao higit tanan. If everything's going great, if I've got lots of money, lots of time, I'm healthy, and that's when life is the best. Are we sure? Because the best of the churches were the smallest and the persecuted. It's when things are hard, when things are difficult, is when we depend upon Jesus. And that's when we stand the greatest in the kingdom of God. That was Smyrna. Though they were persecuted, God had nothing bad to say about them. Which was our final site before we took off, hopped on a plane, headed back for the Philippines. Question?